Good evening, everyone. Before we get into the council meeting at 6:30, we're going to have a workshop. We do these rather informally. Unfortunately, we're limited in time tonight, so unless the council objects, what I'd like to do is, I'm assuming the council's had a chance to review your applications, and in order to give everybody a chance to speak, at least briefly, if you would come up and introduce yourselves, make whatever comments you would like to make. When you introduce yourself, please give your name and your address. And that will give everybody a chance to speak, and then we'll go to the council. Council, any objections? Does that work?
So are we going to have an interchange with questions later? Or?
Well, how do you want to do it? Would you like to let them do a brief introduction, quick questions, and then move on to the next candidate? Is that the preferred approach?
Sure.
Okay, let's do that. Please, again, since we're short on time, please make your opening comments brief, and then we'll have questions, and then we'll move on to the next candidate. So if we will, Mary Jo, would you please begin?
May I stay here, or would you like me to address?
I don't think the people can hear you at home. Do we have a portable mic? Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, please come up to the microphone.
This lady's got spunk, I'm telling you, I've talked to her.
Okay, my name is Mary Jo Garr. I moved here actually 11 months ago from Barrington Hills, Illinois. I live at 8635 Ridge Ponds Drive, which is on the Deer Run Golf Course. It's beautiful. I love it there. I love it here. Okay, my background is that when I was in college, I really wanted to be a city planner, but I didn't have the mathematic ability to become an architect, which you need to be a city planner, or at least back then, you did have to do that. So I went at it from the administrative point of view, and I majored in poli-sci and sociology, and then I went on to the University of Michigan, and I studied public administration with an emphasis on community development, not just physical development, but also the emotional, you want to call it, the side of the community. And after that, I became a mother and a volunteer in various different organizations. And at one point, I think it was 40 years ago, I was chairman of the Plan Commission in the village of Barrington Hills. And that is an area of 26 square miles. We had about 3,500 people in the village, and our zoning was 5-acre zoning because we were on septic. And we could protect our zoning because our soils were pure clay, which I think yours are probably too, pretty bad. And we were very fortunate because we didn't have to have housing for certain populations, and in court it held up. So my during my tenure, we had a contentious time because there was a planned unit development ordinance that was proposed, and some of the members of the community thought that a group had done that because they were financially behind the property that was going to be developed. And so, as I told you on the phone today, and thank you for your call, that's when I grew up. And they were very contentious, and I learned a lot at that time. And then after that, I became president of the Garden Club of America, and that's not a group of ladies drinking tea. And planting flowers. We're a very do-it organization, and I just recently retired from that, and I just don't like sitting on my laurels. I would like to become active again in the community. So,
thank you very much.
Any
Council?
questions?
Council, questions?
Okay,
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jacob?
It was a good summary.
Oh, okay, thanks.
It was.
Name and address for the record again, please.
Yeah. Hi, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Jacob Survey. I reside at 8343 Victoria Drive. I'm a current member of the Planning Commission. I've been serving for 2 years, appointed back in April of 2016. My main focus on the Planning Commission is to make the best decision I possibly can based upon the ordinances that we have in place. And that's what I feel like I do, and try and make the best recommendation to you. So that's what I have been doing. My commitment to the city is because I want to create the best city to raise my children. And I have 2 sons, age 1 and 3. So besides my role that I have now at the Planning Commission, I own a business in town that services Victoria residents. It's employed by citizens of Victoria also. I have a second business in the works that will be opening up here shortly, also Victoria. I'm a firefighter and EMT here for the city of Victoria. I've been proud to serve on the fire department for the last 6 years. I work on call out at the emergency room at Ridgeview when they need help out there. And I serve weekly at my church locally. So all of that, I feel, lumped together really shows my dedication for the city. And I, like I said, I want to do whatever I can to help to provide the best place to raise my family.
Thank you. Council?
Thanks for your time. Oh, sorry.
Council, questions? None? Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris?
Hi.
Name and address,
Thanks for
please.
letting me come. So my name is Chris Keppel, and I live at 6377 Smithtown Road. I lived for about 20 years before that in Minnetonka, and for the last 5 years at this address in Victoria. Just a little quick background on me. First of all, I have a degree in finance from Arizona State, and then an MBA from St. Thomas here in town. I've worked for about the last 25 years in some component of real estate, a big part of that in commercial real estate. Now that my wife and I live in Victoria, and as I mentioned, it's been about 5 years, I just really feel a commitment to the city, and I think it's got a ways to go. It looks like it's got some big plans for the 20-year plan, and I'd like to be part of that. So it's just real simply put.
Thank you. Council, questions? Seeing none, thank you. Just a reminder for the council, if you didn't hear it, Laura Moore is not here. She's not withdrawing her name, but at least her nameplate is here. So, Ann, would you like to go next, please?
Okay, my name's Ann Walter, and I reside at 2642 Woods Drive here in Victoria. I want to get involved because I just moved here in November, but I actually have family that have lived out here for a very long time. So I grew up coming in and out of this great town. I ended up having lived in Chaska and Waconia now for the past 5 years. We moved here because we love the city and we love the town. I have 3 little boys. The oldest one's 4.5. The middle one is 2.5, and my youngest is 1. So I'm planning my roots here. I am just recently quit my full-time job, and I'm staying home with my boys full-time, so that's an adjustment. And I want to put my time and energy in making this the best city that can possibly be for young families. I want to be the voice for the parents that I talk to at sporting events and at school events and at mom's events, being over at the neighbor's house, whatever. Just being that person that can bring those thoughts and ideas. I have a bachelor's degree in retail business. I went to Stout, and I love planning, and I've already read your guys' 2040 plans. To me, that's exciting. I feel like I have great ideas that I can bring forward. And yeah, let me think, what else can I tell you? I should have brought paper like everyone else. But no, I just really want to try to put all my energy in helping this become a great town. That it already is a great town, but to make it even better for young families.
Perfect. Thank you very
Yep.
much. Council, questions? Nope.
Thank
All right, thank you. John?
Thank you, Mayor. My name is John Brownlee. 757 Alley Lane in Victoria. We've been there since 2005. Start with the most important things. My wife, Melanie, and I have 2 little boys. Well, they're not so little anymore. My 7th grader's trying out for the high school golf team, which is kind of mind-blowing, but they both went through Victoria Elementary School. I'm interested in being a part of this. I kind of got interested in kind of what's happening locally, really, probably about a year ago. We've been here for a long time, but just kind of following everything that's been going on in this chamber. Reached out to several of you and talked and sort of trying to learn about what some of the issues are. Victoria is a great city. I think it has a great future. I'd like to be a part of that. My family growing up did real estate and commercial development, and then we owned a building materials company out in Oregon, where I'm originally from. So I've kind of seen both sides of the planning process and the zoning process. And I say from a philosophical standpoint, what I would bring to the table is really sort of trying to strike that balance between the commercial interests of developers and the interests of residents. And a lot of times they're the same. A lot of times they're not the same. And sometimes we have to make difficult short-term decisions to support long-term objectives. And so those are the kinds of things I'm interested in working on here if you ask me to serve on the commission.
Thank you. Council, questions?
Let's have a question. Come on, one question. No.
I have a question.
Oh, wow, okay.
In your questionnaire, the answers, the question why you want to join the Planning Commission, why you want to be on the Planning Commission, you said to help the city of Victoria become more transparent and accountable. So what did you, obviously we know what that sentence means, but what were you getting at?
Yeah. So I think part of what I began to get interested in a year ago is obviously the strife that's taken place among you gentlemen up here. Reading the Victoria Gazette, talking to citizens who are just frustrated with all of it, right? I've been underwhelmed by both sides' interest in sort of communicating with each other and compromising. And I've told some of you that directly to your faces, right? And so I think this city needs some turnover. I think it needs some fresh perspectives. I was talking to one person who was considering running for a political office, and it was clear that he was sort of affiliated with one of the coalitions. And I encouraged him, don't do that. Stay out of that, right? Be independent. We need some sort of fresh perspectives in this town from a transparency and a what was the other word I used? Accountable. Yeah, I think obviously, at the council level, you're accountable to the voters, but I just think this town is just needs some fresh accountability, new voices, new faces, people that aren't necessarily connected to everything that has taken place and can bring sort of some new perspectives. That's sort of what I was getting at.
So do you think the Planning Commission has been effectively functioning the past few years, or do you think there's a problem with the existing Planning Commission?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. I wouldn't say that there's been a problem with the Planning Commission at all. No, that's not necessarily what I was referring to. I have no interest in running for public office. So when I was looking at sort of how could I serve, how could I be a part of it, this is the area that I felt I had sort of some expertise. So that was sort of a general statement, not a specific statement related to the Planning Commission.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Scott?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Scott Stensland. I live at 5760 Marsh Lake Road. Lived there with my wife Kelly and our son Woodrow and a couple golden retrievers for just over 10 years. I currently serve on the 2040 Victoria 2040 Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. I also serve with Carver County Water Organization representing District 3, which is Victoria. Past 30 years, I've worked in the medical device field. I've worked for big companies, small companies, did a lot of different things, sales, marketing, ownership, management. For the last 10 years, I've owned my own medical distribution business based out of here in Victoria. A year ago, when I had the opportunity to apply for the 2040 comp plan, I jumped at that heartily and was accepted, thankfully. But the 2030 comp plan meant a lot to me. I live in the most rural portion of Victoria, and it was really a guidebook for us as to what potentially was going to happen where we lived. Serving on that committee has been fantastic. To be a part of Victoria planning our future roads, our housing, water management, schools, has really been an experience. I have a great appreciation for everything that you all do, and it's been a big education for me. Frankly, I think I've gained more than I can give back. And as you probably all know, the 2040 plan is almost done. It's pretty much cooked. You'll see it very soon. It's going to go on to the Met Council. And, my job with the steering committee is about over. And I'd like to continue. I think that there's a nice fit and progression from everything I've learned with the steering committee moving forward to the planning commission. And I think it's an opportunity to give a little bit more back.
Thank
Questions?
you.
I've got a question.
Yes.
Your experience on the Comp Plan Steering Committee
Yeah.
undoubtedly was a good one.
Yes.
Is a good one. The Met Council dictates density of 3.5 units per acre in specified areas of the city. And I take it that goal has been achieved in the 2040 plan.
I think we're just short of it, like we currently are right now with the 2030 plan. I think we're just short of it. And I think we may be just short of it on the 2040 plan when we see the final numbers.
Right.
We got a meeting next month. But we work, we're the newbies on this. We work with great consultants on this also. And they have assured us, being close to that number is acceptable with the Met Council.
Was it difficult for the committee and the consultants to come up with 3.5 or almost 3.5? Was there any difficulty whatsoever?
Well, there's argument. There's discussion, but this is Victoria's an interesting city. This is a affluent city, and you have to measure a need for. We have a lot of high-end housing, but at the same time, with Met Council, we need affordable housing, and we need townhouses, apartments, and that's what helps us meet that ultimate goal of the 3.23 or 3.5, whatever it happens to be. And so everybody has different opinions on that, but that was part of what was really interesting to me. I've worked on a lot of committees for my career over the years. Most of us have a real similar background. The steering committee, you got a lot of different backgrounds, so you have a lot of different opinions, but we worked through it. I mean, we agreed. It was a great experience. In the end, I think you'll be happy with what you see. It's a good mix.
I think we will be happy. Would you say that the Met Council forced Victoria to do anything it didn't want to do?
No, and that was probably most interesting to me because I sometimes you see some dichotomy. You hear that this is how it has to be. But yet the consultants who are experts, and they do this for multiple cities, so I'm going to put my faith in them. They tell us you don't have to reach those certain numbers. You don't. You just have to, as long as you have a good plan and it makes sense and you're close to those numbers, it works for everyone. And that's I think where we are.
Good. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. We have one candidate for one position on the Finance Committee. Derek, do you want to come up and just say a quick word or two?
Sure. Derek Gunderson, 1265 79 and a half Street. Currently serve Victoria on the Finance Committee. Prior to that, I was on the Planning Commission as Vice Chair. Prior to that, I was in Eden Prairie on the Parks and Rec Commission. I currently chair Carver County's Mental Health Advisory Council, or the LAC. I serve on my church board at Mount Olivet. This is my community. I live in it. I raised 3 kids. I care deeply about the community and the direction that it's going to go. In the capacity on the Finance Committee, I get to examine and use my degree. I've got a master's in public administration with an emphasis in finance and public policy. So I spend a lot of time examining city budgets, we're in a decent place. We're in an okay place. We're in a, I would say, precarious position with all the stress on homeowners. We just lost a business, right? Just moved out of town. They're building this huge building on 7 and 41. And I'm talking about Midwest Water Sports. They just moved out. Did they come before the council to say, can you keep us? Will you keep us? What can you do to keep us? We just lost a business. That puts more pressure to be a cheerleader for the community. How are we going to be a cheerleader for the community when we have businesses leaving? Which is one thing that we all say we need. We need to take pressure off, and the only way you're going to take pressure off homeowners is by expanding your business base. How are we going to do that? How are we going to put a plan together that gets us to that? So, hopefully over the next, I think this is 2 years, that I can put a stamp on, and we can come together as a committee, a council, and a community to put a plan together where we take where we get ourselves into a position to make an impact on homeowners in a good way, and not just say, well, we reduced it by point something. I'd like to see maybe 2 percentage points off, which is a lofty goal in terms of the overall percentage of what our homeowners pay compared to the communities that are around us. So,
Okay, thank you. Council, any questions?
No.
All right. Doug, we haven't started the council meeting yet. In the council meeting, we were going to, as a council, discuss these appointments. Can we do that now? Is that a problem? Because maybe this is a question for Bob.
Do you think we can finish that before 6:30?
No, we'll just hold it for the council meeting. All right, we'll hold it. We're going to take a short recess. We'll convene the council meeting in about 8 minutes. Thank you, everybody, for coming and volunteering to help support the city. It's much, much appreciated, and especially given that we only have 2 slots open, but yet we have 7 candidates. It shows a lot of community support. I'm sorry?
I wish we had 7 slots open.
Exactly. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll reconvene in 8 minutes.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I call to order the March 26, 2018 meeting of the Victoria City Council. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Doug, any changes to the agenda that you have?
No, Mr. Mayor.
All right. I would, if the council doesn't, I move that we shift the Planning Commission, Finance Committee appointments, new business, up to just before the Carver County attorney gives his presentation. I asked the Carver County attorney, and he has no objections. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, so that is now the first item before the visitors' presentation. Council, any other changes to the agenda?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, could I offer to switch number 7, A and B? It seems to me that we should have a discussion about who should vote on legal fees before we actually vote on legal fees.
I'll second that motion. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
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 All right, A and B will remain in their current positions. Okay, at this point, I move we adopt the agenda. Is there a second?
Second motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is adopted. Next item, open forum. Is there anybody that would like to address the council? Going once, twice? Okay, thank you. Next item, consent agenda. Doug, council, members of the public, would anybody like to remove anything from the consent agenda for discussion? Hearing none, I move we adopt the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The consent agenda is adopted. The next item then is the Planning Commission Finance Committee appointments. We think the easiest way to do this is I'm going to ask each council member, we'll start down here with Council Member Crowley. If you would please, would you give us your top two candidates for the Planning Commission?
First off, I think, as I said before, we have 7 wonderful people. Thank you all for volunteering. You all, I think, would do a very, very good job. I nominate Jacob and Scott.
Scott, thank you. Councilmember Striegel?
Thank you all for applying. I nominate Scott and Mary Jo.
Scott, Mary, thank you. Councilmember Vogt?
Thank you for applying. It takes guts sometimes to get up and stand up in City Hall, so I really appreciate what you went through. I'd like to I'd opt for the incumbent Jacobs Surveys to continue. I think the present Planning Commission has done a decent job, and he's been a good part of it. And Scott Stensland, I was impressed by his answer on the density question, and your being on the Comp Plan Steering Committee is about the best background you could get right now.
Thank you. Councilmember Gregory?
I'm going to appreciate everybody being out there, but tough call. So I'm going to throw my name up behind Scott and Mary Jo.
Okay, I'd also like to echo the same comments. I'd like to thank everybody for applying and volunteering. It's clear that Scott is going to be one of the candidates. I'll vote for him also. And I'd like to actually see Mary Jo. I think we could use for a little diversity and somebody with a senior point of view. So by my tally, Scott has 5 votes, Mary Jo has 3, Jacob has 2. Did anybody see that differently? Nope. Okay, so I move that we appoint Scott Stensland and Mary Jo Gary? It's Gar. It looks like Gary. So I move we appoint Scott Stensland and Mary Jo Gar to the Planning Commission. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, welcome. I think it's a formality, but I move that we appoint Derek Gunderson to the Finance Committee. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Scott, or I'm sorry, Derek, you got another 2-year terms? I believe that's what it said. All right, thank you. One point before we move on, I believe in the staff report there was a question on the Planning Commission for the 3 years.
Mr. Mayor, we'd like to have both of those be appointed for 3 years, because that gives us 3 people that will be up next year, and 2 people the next year, and 1 person the last year.
Allow us to stagger it. I move that both of those appointments to the Planning Commission are 3 years. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, those appointments to the Planning Commission are for 3 years. Cindy, do you need this? You got it? Okay. All right, again, thank you to all the candidates. Appreciate all your time and your input. The next item, we have Carver County Attorney Mark Metz. Mark, if you would, just for the record.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Mark Metz. I'm the Carver County Attorney. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you and take some of your time and the public's time to give a presentation on the opioid epidemic that we're facing here, not only in Carver County, but really in the nation. And also with me is Dr. Richard Scott. He's with Carver County Public Health. So we're going to kind of split it up, and I have a PowerPoint presentation that I wanted to go through with some statistics. And this came about because I come here and I present on our prosecution contracts every year, and I thought it might be useful this year to present to the various different cities and our county board and the citizens about our opioid crisis that we're facing. And it starts with our office that is presently prosecuting a third-degree murder case involving a fentanyl overdose. And so we have 2 individuals charged with third-degree murder for their involvement in providing fentanyl that killed a young man in Chaska. And we have somebody that was just arrested today, as a matter of fact, that's in our jail, being held on potential third-degree murder charges as well, that will evaluate the reports. So it is a crisis, and it is something that I think is critical to talk about and educate the public. So I will go through these slides and be respectful of your time as well. I know we have a half hour, so I want to respect that. I start with a slide that shows that more people died in Minnesota from an overdose of prescription painkillers than any other opioids from 1999 to 2014. And I looked at the statistics that show that from that 15 years, we had 29 opioid deaths in Carver County. And we've seen an increase every single year now. And compared to Scott County, they had 41 deaths. So you can see that we think about heroin being at least this insidious drug that kills people, and it does. But actually from prescription painkillers, that is the highest number of deaths that we've seen. This chart shows some of the counties in Minnesota that really have the highest rates of death. Fortunately, Carver County is not in that, but you can see that some of the bigger counties have a more serious opioid overdose crisis. So how do we get to this epidemic? A number of things occurred since the 1990s and 2000s, and one of the main things that changed for us was OxyContin was aggressively marketed by the physicians for pain management, and that started with the pharmaceutical companies and the big pharmaceutical companies that really pushed these drugs on encouraging the doctors to prescribe these pain medications. Because we ask ourselves, how did we get to a point where we have had such an increase in addiction in this period of time? And the studies and lawsuits have now shown, and will likely be going to court in this, to show how these pharmaceutical companies, the manufacturers of these drugs, have, in our opinion, fraudulently marketed. And they got these doctors to prescribe OxyContin, which was a time-release pain reliever. So they wrote these prescriptions at a high level for dealing with people with chronic pain. And soon they learned, people outside of people that are getting this medication, that they could crush these pills and they could inhale them, ingest them, inject them, imbibe in these drugs essentially to get high. And it had the same result as Vicodin, Percocet, other types of opioids. So as I mentioned, there was this allegation that lawsuits that Carver County is going to initiate as well, along with other counties, and I have a slide on that, that they fraudulently marketed and negligently distributed this, and all in the name of profits. And so that's what we believe as county attorneys across the nation has been a major problem that has flooded these painkillers, these opioids, into our communities. Interestingly enough, our country uses 84% of prescription opioids and 99% of hydrocodone-based drugs in the world to treat chronic pain. So in the entire world, why are we using 84% of these prescription opioids, and how did that come about? And the reason this is important is because it leads to addiction. It leads to the crisis that we're facing right now in the United States compared to other countries. So opioids and these base pain medications are very similar to heroin in their effect and their addiction risk. Heroin's become so popular because the Mexican cartel has aggressively marketed this, and over 90% of the heroin that we have on our streets is from the Mexican cartel. It's coming up from Mexico, and it's coming down a pipeline. It's coming down 35W, and it's coming up to the Twin Cities. Interestingly enough, you look at the East Coast, they have a very significant opioid crisis. On the West Coast, they have an opioid crisis, but they have a more increased methamphetamine crisis. You take us right in the middle, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, Minnesota, we have both. Because we're a major artery where these drugs come up. And we had a board meeting with the United States Attorney's Office on Friday and indicated that they have hundreds of pounds of these drugs that are coming up through 35W, and it cannot feed 5 million people of drugs. So that means that they're distributing this, using the Twin Cities as a distribution outlet. Now what we're seeing is that the majority of heroin, it really isn't even heroin, it's fentanyl. And I have a picture of the most high-profile case with Prince. And so what is fentanyl? Well, fentanyl, we hear about the statistics, is 100 times more potent than morphine. It's an opioid used correctly by doctors and physicians. It can be effective for pain. It's usually with a patch with extreme cases that are monitored by physicians. But what's happening is that fentanyl is being sold, usually from China, and it's being sold to drug dealers here in the United States, and they can either have a pill press where they can make it look almost the same as any type of pain medication. They put that fentanyl in these pills, or they put them in some other agents that they believe they're selling heroin and it's not. And so if you take the case that we have in Chaska, that individual died actually of carfentanil. And it's the first case that we've had of a carfentanil overdose that we've charged with third-degree murder. And carfentanil is even hundreds and hundreds more times deadly, strong than fentanyl. In fact, you probably heard that carfentanil is used as a tranquilizer for elephants. And this was in this substance that killed an individual. Now, he didn't know he was taking that. He thought he was taking heroin. So it wasn't even fentanyl. And fentanyl is so potent that the doctors don't even know how to fight this. And it's very cheap to be made and mixed with other agents. So with drug dealers, essentially, this has become more profitable for them than actual heroin. And as I mentioned, Prince died of a fentanyl overdose and fentanyl toxicity, and the case is still pending and under my review, so I can't comment further on it, but it's the most high-profile case that we have, certainly in the United States, of a fentanyl overdose. This photograph, I thought, was really exemplified the difference between the amount of heroin, fentanyl, and carfentanil, and those are all lethal doses. So you can see just one drop almost of carfentanil, which is so powerful, so strong, compared to fentanyl and heroin. So these are not pharmacists that are mixing these. So it's not equal. When you go to a pharmacy and you get, 1 milligram, you're getting 1 milligram. When you get 1 milligram of some drug that's mixed with an agent, it could be deadly because you're taking a portion that could be heavier with fentanyl. And so you can see that we normally think, well, heroin is killing all these different people, and heroin does kill people. But now they're mixing it with fentanyl and carfentanil, and that's quite alarming when I saw that photograph. And our law enforcement partners have to use such precaution now with carfentanil because even touching it, you can be affected and overdose on that. So they oftentimes will ask, instead of, do you have a needle on you? If you have drugs, do you have carfentanil? Do you have fentanyl? Because they need to take those necessary precautions. So as I mentioned, this is the first carfentanil death that I'm aware of. I'm not sure if there's other cases in Minnesota that have been charged with third-degree murder, and that's still pending that we're prosecuting. So some statistics of just overall drugs in our office gives you an idea of how many cases that we handle. In 2016 to 2017, we handled 444 cases involving drugs. So this isn't just opioids, but it gives a certain example of the level of cases that we're handling, and 15 of those drug-related cases in Victoria. So that includes adults and juveniles. So here, 2016 to 2017, we had 15 drug-related cases that we prosecuted or we handled as juveniles.
Is it safe to assume the 444 does not include alcohol-related cases?
Yeah, that's not alcohol related.
That's all
Yeah.
something other than, okay, thank you.
So arrests associated with drugs, you can see the color slide up there shows that there's, certainly a problem that we're facing with law enforcement, violent crimes. This is not just Carver County, but I'm not, and maybe the doctor can talk about where those statistics come from. But
This is taken from 70 of the 87.
okay, 70 of the 80. Yeah, 70 of those counties. But what's interesting to find out is that we do have a serious opioid problem, but methamphetamines is still the most prolific drug that we face here in Carver County, too. It still is, and even in the state of Minnesota, is methamphetamines. I contacted our medical examiner, and we work with the Midwest medical examiner, Dr. Strobel in Anoka County, and they do a tremendous job. And so they're still working, and gathering statistics, 2017. But 2016, there were 27 cases that were non-motor vehicle accidents, and they conduct 11 autopsies. But I wanted to find out, well, how many drugs, alcohol, substance abuse cases did they have? And there's 5 of those. And the substances detected were, cocaine, fentanyl, and heroin. And 2016 was when Prince died. So that fentanyl case was Prince's death. But we see methamphetamines, other opiates, and mixed prescription. Fortunately, we're not as high as that other statistic that we saw with Anoka County and some of the bigger counties, but we do have an issue. So how do we deal with this? We're not going to solve all the problems today. I think what I appreciate, this is a good launching point for us to just have an educational piece, and maybe we touch somebody out there that is aware of this, or they can get help. And so I believe it's prevention, education, and rehabilitation. And we need all 3 of those things to really succeed in fighting this epidemic. There's no easy answers to this public health problem. And we're not going to prosecute our way out of this. That is not the answer. The answer is a combined approach with public health, with this prevention, with this education, rehabilitation. And there is effective chemical dependency treatment for people that are addicted to painkillers, opioids, other drugs. That's really important. But it will take patience and persistence. And there are other forms of pain medication. I want people to think about that and to think about talking to their doctors about what other forms besides these painkillers. So what can we do as a community? And Dr. Scott's going to talk more about this, but I wanted to talk about a few things in my last couple moments. The medicine take back. I think we've promoted this a lot. The sheriff's office does a great job. The cities do a great job in this, is that you can take your prescription medications that you don't use. So you had knee surgery 3 years ago. You didn't use the Percocet. You've got this bottle of pills left over, and then your wife has a bottle of Vicodin because when she had back surgery, she wasn't using those. You should be taking those to these drug take-backs and giving those up to law enforcement so then they can destroy them. We have actual cases that the sheriff was telling about today, individuals that have targeted homes just to break into them to steal their medications because they're so addicted. And so I put this up there that our next big take-back day is Saturday, April 28th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., and you can go to the city of Norwood Young America, New Germany, or Watertown, drop those medications off, go to the sheriff's website, find out, well, when can I go, how can I do this? We also have 3 permanent medication disposal boxes. So the sheriff's office, Waconia City Hall, Chanhassen City Hall. You can go there at any time. They have a drop box that's there. Take your medications. That's a big start. So that's something that people can do, that they probably, all of us, probably have some medications that we just don't use anymore. So I would encourage people to go to that website, go to the sheriff's website and find out, yeah, you know what, maybe I am going to go over there and drop this off. So the education component, learn more about this, support each other, ask questions, talk to our doctors about pain management, and then have an appreciation for how dangerous and addictive these opioids can actually be. I didn't realize it myself. I didn't realize that they recommend that they not give more than 3 days of these opioid pain medications because they're that addictive, for a knee surgery or for something else. What else can we do? And the last thing I wanted to talk about before I hand it off to the doctor is As I mentioned, Carver County has joined other counties to file a lawsuit against these pharmaceutical companies and manufacturers. We've hired a private law firm that's going to probably handle maybe 10 to 20 different counties for us. But individually, our board of commissioners voted to support a lawsuit to hold these pharmaceutical companies, to hold these manufacturers accountable. We're not looking for a big pot of money. That's not what this is about. We may get some distribution that helps us buy Narcan or something. What we want to do is hold them accountable, change the way that they're doing things, because it was for profit, that they got people addicted by fraudulently promoting that these drugs were safe. And it's explained by that increase that we've gone up in these 14 or 15 years. So I appreciate the time, and I know it's very valuable with your agenda items. And so it's been meaningful to at least hopefully bring this to our public's attention about this crisis, because it is, and we can do something together to face it. So there's my contact information as well, and I will now hand it off to Dr. Richard Scott.
Real quick question.
Yes.
What the federal government just approved was some of the, do we know how that will affect Carver County and by extension Victoria?
Mr. Mayor, are you talking about some settlement that they had with a fine with the?
No, wasn't that bill they passed at the federal level included something for opioid crisis, if you will? Do we know what that actually means yet?
I don't, and let's hope that we get that trickle down, that it can help, because what we want to do is we want to get these resources for chemical dependency treatment so we can get these individuals in it. You know, this person that died had been in treatment more than a dozen times. So it's hard, and they're addicted, and they keep trying and trying and trying. So, but that's a good question about, well, can we get these resources to your city, to the county, so we can educate, but also we can get the treatment. So,
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
I actually had a couple questions,
sure.
if you don't mind, and maybe some of these will end up being questions for the doctor. But one of the slides showed a bar graph of the different types of drugs, and meth was still the biggest. But I think your opening slide talked about lethal cases. So is meth bigger in terms of just cases, but not as lethal, or what is?
Yeah, good question, Mr. Mayor and Council Member. We don't see a lot of meth overdose cases, and it's highly addictive, and it's a dangerous drug. I don't know why anybody would want to use methamphetamines, right? But it doesn't kill people at the rate that opioids do, and the painkillers that people get addicted to it. And so it's prevalent in our community with drug abusers, with drug offenders. So we prosecute a lot of those cases. But when we're talking about painkillers, we're not talking about the criminals that we were prosecuting. We're talking about individuals that our parents or our loved ones or others that might get, or our friends and our brothers and sisters that get addicted to it, and they're dying. Yeah. And they're dying because they're overdosing, and it's really, really sad, because I'm sure there's people watching that have loved ones that they played football, they had a knee injury, they got addicted to some type of painkiller, they couldn't get it off it, or they have some chronic back pain, and they were prescribed this thinking it's going to get better, and now they're in this cycle of trying to find this drug because they're addicted to it, they need it. And so I appreciate, that comment, because meth is prevalent, and it's what we see in our court system, but the opioids and painkillers are what killing people.
So also on that chart, and thank you for that answer, it said marijuana concentrates, and I'm wondering, is that the legal medical marijuana that's being vaped, or what did that refer to? It was marijuana and then marijuana concentrates.
Yeah, I'm not. So you can have a synthetic marijuana, which is not marijuana. That's, when we're thinking, they call it synthetics, which are very dangerous too. We're talking about bath salts and things like that. But probably a concentrate, I'm estimating, is probably the pop brownies or other that you might use in a different fashion. Yeah.
And then I guess a comment, and this is about the drug take back. I think in the past people have felt like, well, I'll just flush my excess prescriptions down the loo and it's over and done with. But I think whether it's opioids or other things, they end up in unexpected places, and that has been proven to be a really bad practice. So I think I'm endorsing what you're saying. If you have any comment on that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, too. Thanks for mentioning that. The sheriff told me that they've taken in over 11,000 pounds of drugs in this drug take-back since he started, I think, in 2011. We were meeting today talking about this presentation. I think he said, 11,000 pounds. But that's another really good point, that it's not just that you should be getting rid of these in a lawful way. You put them down your toilet or drain. Up in the Brainerd Lakes area, they tested some of the lakes, and one of the lakes tested really high for certain prescription medications, which was pretty alarming. And it was, how did that get in there? It's from people flushing it down the toilet. And you think, well, I'm just going to flush it down the toilet. Well, that's not the responsible thing to do, especially since there's no questions asked. We're not there to investigate this. You could take your name off of it, leave it in the bottle, take it there, and that's the purpose, is to have it done in a responsible way. And I think I want to point out, too, that I'm not a doctor, of course, and these medications and opioids can be used responsibly. They can be effective if used by a physician and getting a prescription. So I don't want that impression to say that, people shouldn't be using under their physician's care, because they can be. But I think we've seen that we're very concerned about the addictive qualities of this and talking about that together. So
My last comment, and then a quick question for you. And it actually segues really nicely off what you just said, because the addictive nature of it seems to be the thing that gets a lot of attention. But I've been listening to a lot of discussion from oftentimes grieving parents, and it's not kids that were addicted. It was a college kid who needed a little something and thought they were just taking something relatively innocuous.
Yeah.
And the phrase that I keep hearing is one pill can kill, because of the Chinese or the whatever fentanyl, the toxicity of it is so high that it takes virtually nothing.
Yeah.
And that one experiment or whatever it is, and that's the only one you get. So then to the legal aspect, there's two approaches, right? Supply and demand. So we can build a wall, and we can arrest or we can educate and do demand. What's your priority? What is your feeling about the best way to eliminate or reduce the crisis?
I think it's a combination of, we have to prevent, we have to prosecute, we have to have that enforcement, but that's not the only answer. We have to have that education component, that we're working with public health and trying to work with these individuals, and then the rehabilitation. One of the things that has been a success in Carver County has been our Veterans Court, because it's this court that we work with these individuals on their addictions, their issues. What we're looking at in Carver County is starting a drug court. And it's a big investment from our commissioners, and it's one of my goals. And I believe that in our discussions that they're supportive of this in the early stages. But that's something to talk about, that we can't lock up all these individuals. We aim for the drug dealers, and we try to help these people because they're going to get out. And we try to have that incentive for them. But I think that there's going to be a supply, there's going to be a demand, but it's that combination of all of us working together to say, what can we do to really get the proper treatment for them as well? And you're exactly right, Council Member, that is a really excellent point about when you take one of these pills or these drugs, or let's say you're on the street and you just get some Xanax or some type of pill, you're potentially getting a death sentence right there, because that's what the individual that died. He didn't know. He thought, I'm getting high on heroin. He hadn't overdosed from heroin, but he took that not knowing this has carfentanil in it. And I will give my caveat that these are still allegations and they're ongoing and they're presumed innocent, but we have charges in that. But you just experiment as a teenager or as in college and think, well, I'm just going to take this. You don't know what you're getting, because they don't care. These drug dealers do not care, and they're lacing it with these drugs to get this high because they want you to come back. So they're putting fentanyl in it to know that you're always chasing that higher high. And so they don't care if you're going to die. It's not good for their business, certainly, but they want these individuals to come back. So that's probably very scary as a parent to say they're off to college and did it one time and they died and they weren't a drug addict. They weren't somebody that was using this for, a year. They experimented.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Scott? Name and position for the record, please.
Yeah, Richard Scott I'm the Carver County Public Health Manager and the Community Health Services Administrator. So I like to think of myself as the Chief Public Health Officer for the county. I'm really glad to have a chance to supplement County Attorney Metz's presentation, because he mentioned that what approach should we take to address this crisis, this very difficult issue on either the demand or the supply side, and we do need to cover both ends. I'm going to quickly go through some of my stats here because I think Attorney Metz had referenced a lot of it already. So this just talks about these are overall drug abuse deaths. And then if you're specifically looking at the rates of, as you can see, the whole thing is going up for all of drug abuse issues, so not just not just opioid related, but that's the one I think is really scary because of the lethal nature of it. My specialty isn't in substance abuse specifically. It's more in the area of public health. But it's my understanding that what makes this so deadly is that it attacks the respiratory system, and it just often causes people then to suffocate and not able to breathe. And because of not having been able to have control over the dose amount, you don't know what you're getting, and that's why you can have sudden problems. The solution for that, one of the solutions that we'll be talking about briefly, though, is the use of what they call opiate antagonists, naloxone or Narcan, which actually then reverses it, and that drug itself is pretty much harmless for the most part, and so that can be used to reverse the effects of opiates. And that's why we are on a campaign to try to have all first responders, law enforcement, obviously EMS personnel, and now we even have the option for that to be purchased without a prescription. We actually have our medical examiner, our medical consultant for public health is working with the smaller pharmacies, and then also the larger pharmacies have their own physician to sign off on kind of their protocols for selling Narcan over the counter. So if people have a concern about that and they want to have that, they have an option to administer that if they're not sure of why somebody's passing out. So there has been some talk about including, we have AEDs, the automatic defibrillator devices, to help prevent or help treat cardiac arrests. Now there's some talk about whether or not we would need to have Narcan or that opiate antagonist nearby as well, because you never know what might cause a collapse. And that has already been used to save many lives here in Carver County as well. Again, this just talks about opiate-related versus other types of drugs. So I'm not going to spend too much time on here because we talked about, I want to get more into the intent. I think this is significant, though, because this talks about drug overdose death by age, and it's for each individual year, but the top line is 2016, and you can notice the peak there is on 25 to 30-year-olds. So it's that age group that seems to be most affected by this, and so that's why they're having a higher rate of deaths associated with it, and then it drops off and falls fairly similar to previous years after that. This is another area that we'd often talk about is how does these drugs affect out-of-home placement. So child maltreatment issues, you can see that opiates and other drugs have been a primary reason for out-of-placement, and you're probably hearing a lot on the news lately about the increase in out-of-home placement for children with child maltreatment. And so this is part of the reason why that has been on the upswing. Carver County historically has been very progressive in working with families and has actually had some of the lower rates of out-of-home placement because of the philosophy on how we engage families for signs of safety. But this particular medication really makes those approaches challenging, and so that's the other reason why this has been an ongoing concern. So we really do need to take what I refer to as a comprehensive action plan. There's sort of a allegory that I sometimes like to talk about, like the three sisters, and I don't know if you folks have heard that, but there were three sisters walking along a riverbank, and they happened to see all these babies going down the river. And so one of the sisters quickly was trying to gather up all the babies they can from the edge. Another one jumped in and tried to teach them how to swim, which I'm not quite sure how that works with babies, but the intent is to have them deal with the problem. And another sister said, well, I'm going to go upstream and figure out why these babies are falling in the river in the first place. And so we need to have all three of those approaches approaches. If we just do the emergency care response, then we're not going to prevent it. We're always going to be dealing with this problem, and it obviously seems like it's getting worse. If we just teach people how to deal with the suffering, or teach them how to swim in this case, we're still having problems with them wanting to prevent the death and also not preventing in the first place. And if we only go upstream and prevent them from falling off, then we're not dealing with the emergency at hand. So we really need to have all three of those levels of prevention. So we need to have the emergency response, the early intervention, and what I would refer to as primary prevention. And we'll talk just briefly about creating those conditions that create health, which is what primary prevention is all about. Emergency response is really one of the strategies for that is the opioid antagonist protocol, and I referenced that. The naloxone is having that available so that people can reverse the overdose, so it prevents death. So that's preventing that. The other one is just realizing the Good Samaritan laws that we have for reporting. So if you happen to be at a party, you see something, you can report it. In the process that you're reporting, you're not going to be prosecuted for that. Also, it does provide protection for the Good Samaritan to respond. There are other things that aren't always exactly emergency response, but there are ways of decreasing the negative consequences of drug use, like syringe exchange, transitions of care, so that's how you're managing pain, as well as fentanyl alerts, which often come from the feds or other areas to let you know about products that are maybe not safe. Sometimes the fentanyls that are even prescribed may have a defect. The attorney was referencing the slow-release fentanyls. If they have a problem with release, you could get a higher dose than is necessary. So all of those would be part of the emergency response. The early intervention and treatment would be having physicians do substance abuse screening as a routine. We screen for a lot of other things, and that will allow us to do some brief intervention as far as just counseling or education, and also maybe identifying those folks that might be at risk for substance use challenges and then getting them the necessary support. There's medication-assisted therapy for those people who are addicted. It's a very successful therapy when it's done under proper care, and obviously chemical health treatment. The next one, the OB and infant care for neonatal abstinence syndrome. That's when parents or moms are on opiates or other drugs during their pregnancy. How do you handle that? That's going to be both safe for them and their moms. And then we referred to the Take Back program, which is the disposal and safe storage. One of the concerns about flushing it down the toilet is that our water treatment systems aren't really designed to deactivate the chemicals in that, and that's part of the reason why it's a challenge. We used to promote doing that. I mean, my background is actually public health nursing, and that was one of the strategies way back when. But then we realized, well, wait a minute, our treatment systems aren't handling it, and so we have another better system to take care of that. Another thing, in addition to having break-ins, another common thing is when people are having open houses, they're selling their house, and then they have people coming, taking a look at it. They will often go into the bathrooms, look in the medicine cabinet, and take things there, and they're not always being observed. So that's another area where we need to be mindful of education for the prevention side of things. And then again, prevention. One of the areas that we're making some tremendous strides is working with physicians, prescribing physicians, on the appropriate use of practices. They're coming up with guidelines on how to use opiates for pain management and alternative pain management strategies. Obviously, the marketing part of it, enrollment and use in the PMP, which is basically it's a way of electronically monitoring prescriptions so we can keep track of who's receiving the narcotic prescriptions. And so when a patient comes in to see the doctor, they can check to see if they've already gotten that prescription from another physician. So it helps reduce that doctor shopping that can sometimes happen when people are addicted. I mentioned alternative pain management. A risk in ACEs. ACEs is adverse childhood experiences. It's what can we do to prevent even what I often refer to as social determinants of health, are those other things in our society that are either put kids at greater use or greater risk for use, or those things that are more protected for use. And so for most things, that will help kids make healthier choices. Opiates are themselves unique because sometimes they may, as Councilman Striegel was, is it Striegel? That's how? Striegel, sorry. Councilman Striegel was saying is that sometimes kids might be doing things innocuous. They just think it's going to be recreational and it could have something that's deadly in there. And that's what makes this particular drug such a crisis and such a concern. But again, the more that we do to empower youth and our adults to make healthier choices just by how we support them, the less risk they would be even trying that. So that's one thing that we can do. And that's what I mean by creating those conditions for health. Again, the prescribing practices, just briefly, there's 3.5 million opiate prescriptions reported in 2016. That's almost one per person. I mean, not quite, but it's a lot. And we are hoping to expand that prescription monitoring program that I was alluding to. That, I think, will significantly reduce the doctor shopping and other issues associated with that. And then this slide shows that we are beginning to make progress with the prescriptions of opioids. Physicians are realizing that there are other alternatives to opiates and are doing practice. I know I had just an arthroscopy in my knee a couple of years ago, outpatient, in and out. They gave me a prescription for 60 tabs of OxyContin. I didn't need one. And I go back to my orthopedic. I said, how come and he says, well, because we usually want to give you enough for 2 weeks because we always get calls, people saying that they didn't have enough. And obviously now the recommendation is 3 days. And I didn't need one. And I go, we at least need to personalize it. For those who need it and are under care, sure. But for those who don't, why are you giving that? So obviously, if I don't get rid of it, I have that just sitting around my house not needing it. But those practices are changing. I am going to end up with this, though, because the Minnesota Department of Health, with funding from the CDC, has created what they call an opiate dashboard. So if you just go under opiate dashboard, Minnesota Department of Health, it'll come up. And it's a wealth of information, statistics, resources, strategies, work groups. There's a growing number of work groups on how we can address this complex issue together. So I would just leave with that. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate you being concerned about this important issue.
Thank you very much. Council, questions for Mark Metz or Dr. Scott? Go ahead.
Question for both of you. And the message you bring tonight is very important, and this forum helps you distribute this more broadly. But what else can we do? How can we help distribute this further? And what can we do beyond that to help you get this message out further?
I mean, you folks personally as a council?
Yes.
That's a wonderful idea, and I guess I hadn't specifically been prepared to offer that, so I will go back and do my homework, and I will send it to you, and I'm sure the mayor, and then maybe he can distribute it. Because, again, it is a complex issue. The state is starting to put together specific suggestions, but as far as you as a council specifically, I'd be happy to work on that.
To every house in the city, I mean, is there information that we can put in there? How can we help better educate people?
Absolutely. And I'd like to do a little bit more thinking on that because obviously education through newsletters, education through mailings. We're working with the school systems. We're working with our collaborating partners. We're working with physicians to change their prescribing practices. So I think there's lots of ways, but I'd like to spend a little bit more thought on that instead of just off the top of my head on how you folks specifically would be most effective. So that's a great question.
Just as how it actually works. If you would send it to the city manager, Doug Reeder, he'll get it distributed to everybody.
Yeah, this is a great start. This is a launching pad, and we don't have an hour of your time. So this is a good start to educate people and have that. And you could have pamphlets as well. I've seen that in different courthouses about the drug take-back, articles certainly in the paper. I thought about that. We can write articles of encouraging people, but I appreciate that all of you are interested in this and want to make a difference because that's where it starts.
And if you think that the slide deck that you showed us tonight is, stands on its own, I think we could probably host the link to that on our city website, make it easy for anybody who heard about it and wants to go a little deeper to find that information.
Yeah.
Especially the turn-in of excess medications. And by the way, we may not know for months, but if you ever start to hear anything about what the federal government passed and how that trickles down to us, and if there's any help for us as far as getting the word out or collecting unused meds, anything we can do to help better protect the community, let us know as soon as you hear something, although I imagine I don't think they've got the details worked out yet.
I will, and happy to keep you updated on the lawsuit as well, and hopefully that's sooner than later and doesn't take too long to see if we can get some, because part of that discussion is the education component and getting these manufacturers to stop, but it's also maybe some money comes Carver County's way that maybe it pays for Narcan for every first responder, because that's expensive for other things, so thank you.
All right, thank you. Council?
Thank you.
Okay, next item, Doug, Bethesda.
Mr. Mayor, Tom Campbell is here tonight representing Bethesda. They have a proposal to redevelop the property now owned by the Bethesda Intermediate Care Facility here in Victoria. Tom? Maybe Tom's not starting, I don't
So
know.
I'll kick off and then I'll pass it to Monica real quick.
Just for the record,
Yeah.
names and positions.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm Monica Schmidt. I'm the regional director at Bethesda in Minnesota.
Thank you.
I'm Tom Campbell. I'm from Campbell Corporation, actually a consultant working with Bethesda now for over a year, so in handling their real estate department, helping. So the reason we're here tonight, just more before I go with Monica, the reason we're here tonight, really the purpose is to explain a concept to you on kind of update you on Bethesda, where we're at, and then explain a concept for redevelopment of the site. So we're not at the stage where we're asking any sort of permission or anything. This is more of a kind of hopefully a courtesy, sort of transparency, sort of informational meeting. So just so everyone's aware.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Like I said, I'm Monica Schmidt. I'm the regional director. My maiden name was Detelm. I grew up in Victoria. My mother and my brother still live here in town. And in 1975, I started working for a company by the name of Community Living Incorporated. And they did what Bethesda does, provided residential supports to adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we operated as Community Living Incorporated until August 1st of 2013, at which time Bethesda purchased Community Living. So what was Community Living became Bethesda Lutheran Communities. So a little bit about Bethesda. Oh, I have to operate the... How does this work? Yeah, why don't I let you go through it? So I'm not sure where we're at there in the slides. So at any rate, a little bit about Bethesda. Bethesda actually started operating in 1904 in Watertown, Wisconsin. Watertown is north of Milwaukee, and we still operate a corporate center there today. And so a long history of providing supports and advocating for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, adults. So Bethesda is a national Christian faith-based organization. And our volunteers and staff really make a difference in the lives of people we support every single day. Our mission is to enhance the lives of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities through services that share the good news of Jesus Christ. I have a slide with a few numbers. There's our mission. So just for your information, we serve about 1,800 people nationwide. We have in excess of 3,000 employees and about 300 plus programs. So the next slide shows you the states that we operate in. So California, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, New Jersey, Oregon, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. So Bethesda and Minnesota. Up on 82nd Street, we have 4 homes. They're licensed as intermediate care facilities. There's 2 12-bed, 1 11-bed, and 1 6-bed. So that's 41 licensed beds that operate here in Victoria. Then we also have programs in Anoka County. We have 2 12-bed intermediate care facilities in Coon Rapids, Minnesota. We have a 4-bed, what's referred to as a waiver home, 4 people living in a single-family home in Blaine, Minnesota. And then we also operate a thrift store at just north of Highway 101 and 7. So that is Bethesda in Minnesota. So back to Victoria. Like I said, there are 41 licensed beds. There are 31 occupied beds right now. We have approximately 50 employees here in Victoria that come from the surrounding communities. The ages of the people we support right now go from 18 to 86. So a wide range of ages and abilities. However, I would say we never like to categorize people, but most of the people we support they all need 24/7 support. So but Bethesda is faced with a changing industry. There's a huge push in our industry and really a lack of support for large congregate settings like we have on that campus property up on 82nd Street. the movement in the industry is to have people integrated into their communities, living in smaller settings or living with a family, but not living in large congregate settings. So, and so young people coming into the system aren't really, they aren't looking for our services. That's why we have as many vacancies as we do. So that's a lot of change going on in our industry, and something that Bethesda needs to respond to if we want to continue to provide supports into the future, because it's not financially sustainable as it is, and as I say, the industry just isn't really supporting it as it did in the past. So unless you have questions right now for me, Tom would take it from here and tell you about our concept idea. Did you want me to run it, or you got it?
I got it.
Oh.
Take care of it. Thanks, Mark. Okay. Our existing site is basically comprised of 2 parcels that compose of a little over 4 acres. On that site is 4 structures, 4 buildings that total about 13,000 square feet. Those buildings were built, I think, Monica, in 1970s, early 1970s.
We opened in 1971.
Yeah, so there's inherent functional obsolescence involved in those buildings. There's also, we did a site survey, there's asbestos, et cetera. So we need to, so basically, those buildings will now be vacated. So something's going to have to be done with those. So currently we are tax exempt, and the current zoning on that is multi-residential. Also, I looked at the city's Victoria's 2040 Future Comprehensive Plan, which I think is under. You know more about this, so my Google, that site is identified future use as medium density multi-residential. So both parcels. So Bethesda really is considering, the real estate department is considering 2 options. One, we just sell it outright, as is, sell it. We feel, based on the site characteristics and the zoning, it will be redeveloped into some sort of multi-family housing development, would be my guess. There is another option, and that option is to really, for Bethesda to, Monica mentioned that there is a shift in the industry. That shift is striving more towards freedom. We call this Project Freedom, but it's to create independence or inclusion as well as independence within the model. So can Bethesda create a model, a development that for housing, that for the community, but also really goes after their ministry, which is serving persons with disabilities, intellectually, developmentally disabled, but also the faith-based component, because Bethesda is faith-based. So another option could be then to redevelop that parcel and Bethesda own it and manage it like it currently does. So what would that concept look like? Site transformation. So doing some investigation, talking with city staff, the possibility exists of up to 51 units of adult living community, which really is kind of a fancy way of saying senior housing. But that's the industry terms right now. And most of it would be market rate. There would be an affordability component to it. Owned and managed by Bethesda, age restricted to 55 years and older. Up to 25% of the development would be earmarked for persons with disabilities, so actually people that Bethesda serves. And again, it's not necessarily 25%. Faith-based housing community, that's really important. Bethesda is faith-based. We'd want to continue that. And then we would have a community center. The community center would be for the people that lived within the development itself, but also open it up to outside the development to the neighborhood as well, and the outside community. So, and the development is proposed not to be real estate tax exempt, so it would be on the tax rolls. So here's a concept site plan, and again, this is all preliminary, as you see in bold letters in red at the bottom left. So our preliminary concept is the 51 units. on 82nd Street, starting there, moving to the south, I think that is. That would be single-family pods, residential pods. The back of the parcel would be our apartment homes, which would contain approximately 36 units. I think it is 36 units of housing and parking as well. Right behind there is the baseball diamonds, the walking trail. To the bottom of the page is more baseball fields. That's the Lions. Just to get everyone's bearings, site bearings, where we're at. This is the second and third floor, and you can see how the apartment homes actually go over the garage. Currently, based on soil maps, we're seeing that there's the water table is quite high there, so underground parking may not be feasible economically for this. So currently we're saying surface parking, and again, this is concept. So this is the single level villa type homes, individual entrances, individual garages, etc. Very similar to the developments I see around here. And then this is the apartment home. The community center is in the center, but again, this is all concept at this point, and subject to change. It probably will change, but based on city staff feedback, etc. So next steps. We've had a neighborhood meeting last week. So we sent out notifications to actually beyond the 350 feet. We went down streets. We went everywhere we would think someone would be interested in knowing what would happen to the site. So we had
20 people.
Okay, we had about 20 people come to that meeting. We gave them this exact same presentation for the most part. And the feedback that we got, there was some, questions on parking. There was questions. They actually comment on the development itself as far as 2-car garages versus 1-car garage, etc. But I think there was support across the board.
Yeah, it was very positive support.
It was a very positive meeting, which we were very encouraged about. So we will continue to have those neighborhood meetings, by the way. So that'll be, as we progress, we're going to do that. That is just the Bethesda ways to have total transparency, and we really want to make sure we're good neighbors. So next steps, we'd like to progress the financial analysis. We'd like to request tax incremental financing to help with the demolition and the site development and the construction. And this development, we feel in our preliminary financial model, could not happen without using TIF proceeds. So we'd like to advance the design. We'd like to get some feedback from city staff and really start to get into the details of the overall project design. And of course, as I said earlier, we would provide periodic updates to the neighbors as we go along. So Monica, you met. Mike Rollard is sitting behind me with his hands raised. I actually work for Mike. He's the boss. He is in charge of the real estate department for Bethesda, and then myself. So, any questions at all? That was a really quick, brief overview, and I'd be happy to go back to the site plan or whatever you guys
and
need.
Just for reference for others that may not know where this is, can we pull this up on the GIS map so people understand that are watching from home? Council, questions?
Just comment. I'm very enthusiastic about your plan, and I encourage you to continue to work with staff. Great. Thank you, Jim.
Can you just quickly review the stats on what is on that property today and some of the problems with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that. There are 4 structures. 3 are exactly the same, and they have 12 licensed beds in each of them, and they're on a cul-de-sac on 82nd Street. So, and then in the back, was built later, is a structure about half the size of the other 3, and it has 6 licensed beds in it. So And they are intermediate care facilities, group homes for adults with disabilities, where we provide 24/7 support. So we've got 3 shifts running in all 4 of those homes at all times. I think, like I said, and so when the decision was made that we could no longer continue to support those people in the intermediate care facilities, we are continuing to work with those individuals and their families to provide housing in the community that is more integrated. So Bethesda is looking at purchasing homes and having 3 or 4 people with disabilities live in neighborhoods, in family, residential homes, because that is the way the industry is moving. So, or has moved, and we're catching up with that. So, like I say, they were built in 1971. Between 1971 and 1972, the first 3 were built, and then later, I'm trying to remember how much later that 4th building was built, but I want to say it was in the late 80s, but it was some time ago. It might have been the early 90s.
And were they originally constructed by Bethesda? And
they were originally constructed by Community Living Incorporated,
right,
and
you said that.
there were 4 men who owned Community Living. 2 of them lived up in Hartwood, Gerald Gross and Julius Mole. They're both deceased now, but they, along with 2 other partners, started Community Living. And so I remember it being built, and that was all Chubby Arts' farm, and that was all farmland, and so the community really grew up around those group homes. Because when we first, I started working for them in 1975, but when we first built those, it was completely surrounded by farmland. So yeah,
I think many people would be surprised to know this exists and functions in this way. I thought of them just as apartment buildings myself.
Oh yeah, some people. Yeah.
Are they pretty well fully occupied?
Historically, yes, they have been. We've had a lot of years we have a very solid reputation in the industry for providing quality supports and services, and historically they have been. But as the demand for that type of living arrangement, they're double occupancy bedrooms. People want their own room. That they want, you got that campus style setting, so it has more of an institutional. The state sees it as an institution rather than an integrated living environment like Bethesda is proposing. So it's really falling out of favor. So we do have 10 openings, which of course makes it financially unsustainable.
Thank you. Ann, thanks for bringing this up, by the way. Just real quick, I want to make sure I understand this. I understand the details aren't finalized. If the current concept goes forward, only 25% of that housing would be available for the developmentally challenged. Did I understand that correctly?
Up to 25%.
And then the rest would be basically senior housing for 55 and older, active, right? Mm-hmm. Just regular.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
55 and older.
Independent.
Independent living. Yeah.
Independent living, right.
Yeah.
So just regular commercial senior housing, basically.
Yes.
That's an accurate
But
statement?
but this is a faith-based component, so we'll follow all fair housing law practices, of course. But we are a Christian-based organization, and that's a model that we will follow. Plus, we'll have a community center that will be open up for the community as well. So.
Bethesda does support people of all beliefs, though, and non-beliefs.
Absolutely.
We provide sports and services to anyone who needs them.
So what is that? 25%?
Regardless of
25% would be how many people, roughly?
Well, in Tom's concept, there's 51 units, so whatever. Yeah.
So it isn't that many compared to how many people are there right now.
No, it's not.
Correct. So it's the model is for integration, community integration. Yeah. We don't want to have we don't want the population to be, because then we'll turn into an ICF again. So we don't want that. We can't have that.
And
so
the state
law won't allow.
Yeah, and the state won't allow us to relicense those homes in any manner because they're adjacent to an institution. So they're not integrated. So you can't. So that's the funding. The funding support isn't there, and the industry. So the Minnesota Department of Human Services. We started conversation with them last May. With our first goal, can we preserve this? And interestingly enough, and on a side note, I'm on a task force that DHS has started now looking at the future of ICFs in Minnesota, because a lot of ICF providers are closing for the very reasons that we have found the very situation we found ourselves in. So it will be interesting to see how the industry and the state decides to move forward with ICF level of care, because it does hold a place in the system. It's often a stop before skilled care, before long-term care in a nursing home.
Thank you. Councilmember Gregory?
So you're in the process of transitioning?
Yes.
Getting
The
homes?
31 people
Getting
that
homes,
live on
okay.
the campus right now
When
are
do you
transitioning.
when do you anticipate that being completed?
That's a really good question.
I know somebody that's there, and I didn't know that you were doing that.
The goal would be by the end of our fiscal year, which
Yeah.
would be the end of August.
Of this year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Really?
I suspect, I would.
It'll be, it's a.
It's going to take
it'll take
longer
time.
than that, in my opinion. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Council, any more questions, comments?
What's, I guess, you're at a decision point. You've got two paths, and is it, what's the tipping point for you?
Well, I think either way, by the way, I'm Mike Rollard. I'm, sorry.
Yeah, if you would, please.
Mike Rollard, I'm the Senior Director of Real Estate for Bethesda. So I think either way, just the way funding is going, the ICFs close one way or the other. Then to Tom's part in the presentation, either we sell the land or we develop it. Honestly, a big part of being able to afford the redevelopment would be a TIF component of it. With our financials, it kind of meets, from our view, the but-for test, which would allow for TIF, which really makes the financials work. If the financials don't work, it's a tougher sell to make a business decision that isn't necessarily a financially solid decision. But it would. Our goal in the end is Project Freedom that Tom talked about a little bit. An integrated living environment for everybody. So it could be a group home on there plus a host home, which would be, for lack of a better term, like adult foster care, where you have an extra bedroom and somebody lives with you, or shared living where maybe I live with somebody with IDD in an apartment together. Those sorts of models would all integrate together with just general public in that apartment and townhome complex. So,
Thank you. So the financial analysis, have you looked at do you have a rough project cost at this point, enough that you can look at what would be TIF qualifying expenses related to that, and you feel like the math can work if TIF is
correct?
supported?
Yeah. So we've done some financial analysis already. We've engaged a contractor to give us construction numbers on our actually what you see up there, which is very concept. So. And based on the preliminary numbers, yes, the TIF is required for the development to proceed.
And there is enough qualifying expenses?
Yes.
Okay. And then do you have just ballpark, and I'm not going to hold you to it, but just ballpark, is this a $10 million project, a $5 million project?
It will be north of $14 million for sure.
Okay.
And we've done a market study as well to kind of give us a good idea of, on that financials, like what's market rent going to be for them. Like originally we were looking at two-story townhouses, but then with the market research, it really showed like a one-story villa made more sense. It met the market better. We'd probably get better rates with it going to a villa. So we've done to that level in our analysis on the financials.
Yeah, this is great. I think the community has spoken pretty loudly about the desire to have more 55 plus, independent living. So press on.
This concept looks really nice. I'm just interested, what expenses have you learned are TIF related? Just give me an example of some of the expenses that would have to be covered through TIF.
Well, we didn't go through and identify everything, but certainly the demolition, any infrastructure, of course. And under the state of Minnesota's TIF, the housing component up to 25% has to have an affordable component to it, which means either a 40 at 60% CMI or a 20 at 50% CMI. So those, if we did that and we meet those tests, then the actual development, the construction cost would be a qualifier for the TIF. Okay, and that's
You mentioned asbestos and other things that.
Yeah, any sort of remediation, of course, the standard TIF is anything, demolition, infrastructure, et cetera. But in the state of Minnesota, we're able to, if we meet this test on the affordability component, we're allowed to use the housing component of that TIF. So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Council, any other comments, questions? Thanks. I think we all look forward to learning more.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Next item, 6C, pedestrian crossing. Ann?
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and Council. For the past several years, I know there has been quite a bit of discussion surrounding some of the pedestrian crosswalks in the community. We've heard some complaints and things from our residents, and also some of the council members have taken a great interest in it. So doing some research, I came upon an interesting program that has been around actually for quite some time. It's in communities in Florida and Japan and Washington. Even in St. Paul, they have tried this program. Basically what it is a program where flags, small flags, and I'm going to pass around one. I've got a little show and tell here for you. You can take a look at it. Where flags are placed on either side of the crosswalk in containers with signage that would allow pedestrians to take the flag as they're crossing through the legal crosswalk. And what it does, is it an end-all solution to the problem? I don't know the answer. There has been success stories and also failure stories in some of the areas that we've looked at. But it gives some additional visibility to pedestrians that are in the crosswalk. I think it also helps, looking at changing driver behavior, I think is a key component of when we're talking about crosswalk and crosswalk safety. So I wanted to bring it here tonight to get some reaction, feedback. Like I said, communities have seen some success and others have not. We're looking at probably about $500 an estimate to install. One of the one location for a pilot program that I really thought might be a good location is at St. Victoria Church right across from Lions. It's at a non-controlled intersection. It is signed. It's a legal crosswalk because St. Victoria Church and Lions Club gets a lot of activity. So I do get quite a few calls about this area. But if the council wanted to move forward with it as a pilot program, I know we are continuing to work with Carver County on some of the crosswalks that disappeared on County Road 11, but we are continuing to do that. But with this program, like I said, it'd be about $500 with the signs, the containers, the signage that we would place there. I did talk to our city attorney, too, about this and his suggestion, because I was concerned about some liability if we've got somebody that just walks out and unfortunately has an accident. But he suggested that we put some signage in place on both sides of the crosswalk that reminds people that you still need to look both ways. You still need to, make sure that it's safe to cross. And then other than that, I don't think that Bob had any issues with this program. So with that, I'm happy to try to answer any questions, concerns, comments.
Yeah, thank you, Ann. Do we have a crosswalk down where Deer Run is, where the golf course is?
We
where
used
people try to cross there?
We used to.
There's not an authorized crosswalk there?
Correct. Not today, but that's one of the ones that we're working on with Carver County.
It's authorized. It's legal. It's legal.
Got it.
The curb cuts are there, and the pedestrian access, the ADA accessible ramps are all there, but there's no painting, there's no signs.
So we couldn't extend this as a pilot program to that location also?
Not at this point in time. I don't think that would be allowed by Carver County.
All right, to me,
It would be legal.
To me, this seems to be, for $500, we at least try it. And The flag's not going to stop a car, but Bob, you're comfortable that we put the right signage up, the city doesn't incur any liability here?
Yeah, and Mayor and Council, just to be clear, I wanted Ann to be on board with the idea that the city wouldn't be working at sort of cross purposes with the county. As I understand the county's view, and I don't know that you all agree with the county's view on this, but the county's view is that persons crossing their highways have to be sort of responsible for their own safety, and that removing some of the crosswalks is intended to make that clearer to pedestrians. Again, without commenting on the wisdom of that, that's the county's view. And so I just wanted to make sure that we made it clear to pedestrians that we were not working at cross purposes, or that our flags meant that somehow cars were going to stop in a way that they wouldn't otherwise stop. They're going to stop or not, and it's up to the pedestrian to make sure that they're crossing safely.
I would like to see a kind of a dual pilot here. I think the area that you're identifying here is good for the proposal that's been put forward, and it's certainly very minimal cost-wise. There have been a number of places where I've seen what is, I suppose, slightly more expensive than just crosswalks, where there's actually LED illuminated flashing lights. It doesn't look terribly expensive. In some cases, I've seen it on stop signs. In other cases, it is, crosswalks and a post that, a pedestrian can push the button to light it up. So it isn't always lighting, and therefore you kind of become numb to it, but it's only lighted when the button gets pushed. And I like to look at running that in parallel with this, so you have kind of two competing solutions, and to see if one is adequate, or if something more elaborate, especially in the Deer Run area where speeds are still at 45 posted versus here where it's 30. And I think something that is more attention getting is really necessary there.
And I can certainly get some cost estimates on that too. And that'd be something I'd have to work with Carver County since it is their road, but I can get some estimates on that.
Yeah, this looks like a pretty neat program. I think people would have fun with it, quite frankly. You mentioned that sometimes it works in some communities and some it doesn't. I'm kind of curious on what doesn't work. And the other point is, any concerned about, not that my kids would ever done this, but wait for some cars to get out there, throw the flag out there, and all of a sudden we got some rear-end collisions going on.
One of the things that obviously vandalism and the signs disappearing are one of the biggest issues that I ran across.
The question is, how long does the flag
Yeah,
last?
yeah, and in some places it lasts longer than others. I know we had a discussion about putting something downtown, and I was like, yeah, no, I don't think so. We'd probably lose them in a week.
A night.
Yeah. So in other areas, I think that pedestrians and unfortunately drivers, they don't necessarily know what the rules of the road are, and whether, stepping out, once you step into that crosswalk, you still have a fear of being run over, but it's the responsibility of the vehicle to stop once somebody's in a crosswalk. And so, yeah, there were instances of people just blowing past, which they do, I think, today anyway. So this just gives them a little bit more visibility, I think, and when they're in the crosswalk. And so, yeah.
Does the county have any issues with us trying a pilot program like this?
I have not contacted them, but that would be one of the first things that I do is get a hold of them to see if they're objectionable.
I think by doing this is a good thing. We can't lose doing this, but this intersection is not as dangerous as some of the other ones that we have. And so I would like to believe that the county would not stop looking at the other intersections we've requested them to look at, and we make progress, because the Deer Run intersection, for instance, was one of those that was marked, and it is heavily used, and it is very dangerous. So I by doing this, I don't want to send a message to the county that we're just going to forget about it.
Yeah, and I don't think that is the case. I know that continues discussions.
And the other thing I notice is, I hope Attorney Vose's depiction of what the county's philosophy isn't quite what you said, because the onus is not on the it's totally on the pedestrian at all.
But that was the reason, council member, that was the reason it was given to us why the crosswalk was removed. Is because there was a liability because people didn't understand how the crosswalk would work.
I heard that. But what Attorney Vos was alluding to is that, there's a legal statute out there that says that it is the responsibility of the driver as well as the pedestrian. So this whole thing is a problem because I think it's very one-sided here.
And
the way it's operating.
I agree with what you're saying, and I support what Councilmember Streetel suggested, is that we have two different approaches. I don't want to browbeat the county. I'm tired of waiting for a solution.
Yeah.
I want to work with them to find a solution. Let's go do it and see if they'll partner with us.
I think Councilor Striegel's idea is a good one. I mean, it'd be nice to do a controlled test, compare this to something.
And I actually believe that the rationale from Mr. Robgent for his approach, I can respect it. And it wasn't about legal liability. He referred to someone being killed in one of his crosswalks and the false sense of security that being in a crosswalk led to that behavior where people would step off the curb into danger, and believe that drivers understood and would abide their role. And I think it isn't, the primary responsibility lies with the motorist, but it's the pedestrian that is dead in the road if the motorist fails. So I can respect his logic. I can't respect the outcome that everybody is, somehow going to be more limited in their mobility because motorists don't know and don't abide the rules.
So I don't think the county's going to stop the work that we've already begun as far as making all of the crosswalk improvements. But as long as they have no objections, I see this as a short-term interim solution, and we should go forward with it, assuming the county doesn't raise some objections to it. And then once the long-term fix for the crosswalks goes in, then we can reevaluate whether this stays or whether this goes away. But it's worth at least trying. It's a small cost, and it seems worthwhile. It'll be interesting to see how long the signs remain where they are. So, council, additional comments, questions?
How many flags do we get for $500?
Well, what's kind of nice is that the Public Works guys can make these minus the flag itself piece. It's just a piece of PVC, and so I'm going to guess we're in the neighborhood of 20, right off the top of my head.
And in terms of bringing back, I guess, is there consensus for having the Public Works director bring back costs for something with a little bit more, I guess, a little more visibility to it, a little more oomph to it, and attempting to run it as kind of a side-by-side pilot?
Are you talking about?
If there, I think I heard support for that. So do we need a motion, or is that just something we can direct to be done?
Yeah, I think there's consensus. So I move that we direct the Ann to go ahead and proceed pending approval by the county. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ann, I think that's what you need.
I guess the question then is, do you want me to continue to look at the more lighted pedestrian signs as well, get cost estimates on that?
Right. I think the understanding.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Council, jump in if I've got this wrong, but the understanding is all of the work we've already started and talked about a number of times, that continues. This is not to replace that.
Okay. Correct.
Perfect.
That was my
Yes.
intent.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Ann. Doug, next item. Finance Director, 6D.
Mr. Mayor, staff is recommending that we enter into an employment agreement with the Finance Director, Kelly Grinnell, to allow her some severance pay in the event that the city would end her employment here. Very important that we protect the very important employees that we have. As you know, Mr. Mayor, we've already lost a couple of key employees, and it's my recommendation that we go ahead with this agreement to give some confidence to the employee that we appreciate her work. She's been here for nearly 10 years, and that we would like to see her stay here.
All right,
It's my recommendation that you make a motion to approve the employment agreement with Kelly Grinnell.
Thank you, Doug. Comments? We'll start. Councilmember Curley.
I support it.
Any other? No? Councilmember Striegel.
So, a question. I assume, just in the interest of transparency, clarity, that if there was any dismissal for cause, that wouldn't be covered by the longer severance.
It clearly states that in the agreement is written by the city attorney.
Okay. And then I believe this was also one of the caveats that Dr. Fersman had put in place with respect to his willingness to be a partner to the city for the search.
Actually, it was
And my agreement to stay.
Sorry, it was your caveat, yes. Okay, I support it, thank you.
Councilmember Vogt.
I support it.
Councilmember Gregory.
Just a couple things. First of all, Mr. Reeder, he's got my 100% support. Ms. Kelly Grinnell, she has 100% my support as well. I just, personally, I think this is bad policy. We did this for both Ms. Hokanen and Mr. Landhauser, and so it was billed as kind of a retention tool, and I think that's kind of what we're doing here as well. And it didn't work. When we gave Ben and Lori this same deal, they both quit within a couple of months. So as a retention tool, that didn't quite pan out. As far as dismissing without cause, I don't see anybody doing that. I don't see Mr. Reeder doing that for any reason. I think that would be pretty bad decision-making ability on your part, and it would be bad decision-making ability on our new city manager as well. I don't anticipate hiring a bad city manager, making poor business decisions, dismissing somebody without cause. Again, Ms. Grinnell, you just got my 100% support. I think you're doing a great job. And I gave Ms. Hokanen a very good review. And if I were to give you a review, it would be a very good review as well. And I have no reason to believe that Mr. Reeder would dismiss you without cause. And I don't think a new city manager would dismiss you without cause. So with that said, I just think this is bad policy. It's very different than anything that Chanhassen does. Chanhassen offers 1 week of severance for every year's service, and I think that's a good policy. And quite frankly, I would like to adopt that policy as well.
We're not allowed to give 9 months. 6 is the most we can give, if that's what she's been here 9 years.
1 week of service.
Oh, 1 week?
1 week for every year. I believe that's their. So they get 26 weeks of severance after.
Okay. Yeah.
So, anyways, like I said, you've got my support, but I think this is just a bad policy. And not only that, but where does it end? I mean, how far down the line do we go? Do we offer this to Public Works? I don't know. All the way down the line. I talk to some very nice cleaning people every day, and when I come in here, and I'd hate to see them go as well. But so I'm not going to support this.
I also believe this is bad policy. This has nothing to do with Kelly. It's simply, in my opinion, bad policy. None of the surrounding cities do this, and I don't think it's fair to the Victoria taxpayer to give these kind of benefits out there. She's got nothing to fear. I don't know where this is coming from. The retention doesn't work, and to me, it's just simply bad policy. But I think everybody's had a chance to say. So at this point, is there a motion?
Well, I'd like to make another comment on it, though. I think I'd ask the question, what did it cost for Lori and Ben's to put that attempt to make that retention? What did that cost the city to do that?
Is that a general question? Is it?
I guess I'm looking at Mr. Gregory, who was pointing it out as a flaw. So did it cost us anything to do that?
No, it didn't, but looking into the future, and not speaking of Ms. Grinnell, I mean, if you're a little bit cynical, you can say that if we do this for Ms. Grinnell, we'll do it for other people, and maybe down the line we will hire somebody that, just decides, you know what, I kind of would like a vacation, 6 months vacation, and maybe I'll just not do very good work for a while, and then it's up to us to prove that they aren't doing well.
But isn't that dismissal for cause then?
I don't know. I mean, for dismissal with cause, I mean, that's somewhat arbitrary, isn't it? We would have to prove that they're doing bad work, and which would mean, I'm not sure how we do that.
I think it's a bad performance review.
Right, but how often can we do performance reviews? Once a year, once a month, once a week?
I think when there's an issue, you can review. I think it's a set policy or it's a set practice. There is a required minimum, but I believe you can identify a performance issue at any point in time and create a plan around that. And then as the first step, if you believe there's an issue, and that's the beginning of your cause. And I think, you can make, no matter how much you like a person, you can make such a hostile place to be that you can't retain them no matter what. And there was very, very clear intent for that to happen with Lori and Ben. So,
sorry, I disagree with that.
Well, the record speaks for itself. But anyways, I think this is very specifically about Kelly. This isn't a blanket statement about the finance director position. As I understand it, this is very specifically about giving Ms. Grinnell assurances. And
I stand by Dr. Fersman's comment. This is the least expensive insurance policy that we can try to pursue.
I say the same thing. This is an insurance policy, and it's very cheap, knowing what could happen. The second thing is, we have extraordinary circumstances here. This is not business as usual. And the extraordinary circumstances have already proved to be very extraordinary. So things haven't changed. That's Dr. Fersman's take on the situation, is that we are not capable of functioning as a group to hire a new city manager at this time. So it's very extraordinary, and it demands extraordinary measures.
I call a question.
All right, did we have a valid motion on the floor? Did anybody make a motion?
No, I call the question.
Which is
all right, I'll
forcing
make a
vote.
motion to approve an employment agreement with Kelly Grinnell with the terms as stated.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Nay. Did you get that, Cindy? 3-2, it passes. Myself and Councilmember Gregory vote against. Next item, Discover Victoria Day. Gwen?
Hi. So this is a motion regarding Discover Victoria Day, which was first held in 2011 in a partnership with the Victoria Business Association. It's been held every year since then for up through 2016. It was held in the Recreation Center midday for a few hours. And then last year it was moved to Bayfront Park to be held in conjunction with the first Classic Car Night. So that is what was envisioned to happen again this year. The move in location and timing was regarded as beneficial and supportive of the event. This year, however, there's some uncertainty about where Classic Car Night will be held in view of the fact that there might be road construction along Steiger Lake Lane. So I spoke with Joe Leisner, who is the president of the Victoria Business Council, and talked about the timing of when the city would know whether, in fact, there was going to be this road construction. And they are looking at pursuing permission from Three Rivers to hold the event along the trail. If that is where the event is held, then there won't be any room for vendors. If Three Rivers doesn't give permission, they aren't really sure where the event or if the event will be held. So there's a lot of uncertainty around that right now, and given the staff transition that's happened on the city end and the departure of two of the people who were very involved in planning the Discover Victoria Day, no planning has occurred so far. So in speaking with the Victoria Business Association, they said that they could go either way. If we felt that it just wasn't feasible at this time and wasn't good use of our time to plan for that, they were okay with that. So at this point, we would recommend that you make a motion to suspend Victoria Day for this year, and then next year we'll have more certainty in terms of when and where the classic cars will be held. Obviously, the road construction has been done; it'll be here, and we will again partner with them to work on that event.
Thank you, Gwen. Council comments, Councilmember Crowley.
I'm disappointed that we're not able to do this. I do have concerns over the proposed approach to parking. I don't think, well, I know that staff went away with looking for ideas of how to modify that, and I do think it does need to be modified from the original plan. I would like to see this go forward, but I certainly understand the reasoning why you're suggesting it not go forward.
Councilmember Striegel.
I guess I'll echo the comments. It's certainly disappointing to have another casualty to community events. I think being shorthanded on the staff in the key areas makes it really difficult to imagine how we could do it well and do it justice. So I think it may be the best call for now, but definitely a disappointment.
Councilmember Vogt.
It sounds like it's necessary, but it's very unfortunate because the participation in this program has been declining. So this would have been a year to really give it a lot more effort and see if you could revive it. So I'm a little bit concerned that we would just not have it, and it's going to be a real challenge next year.
Well, and just to follow up on your comment, I think that next year we would be in a much better place to give it the attention that it needs and could benefit from. So I respect your opinion.
Plus, the construction should be done by then.
Right.
So, Councilmember Gregory?
Yeah, I would agree with staff recommendation here. Uncertainty on the construction issue is certainly going to be a big deal, and if we did even try to go forward with that, it wouldn't give us a good metrics of how successful it could have been without the construction. So I support the recommendation.
Yeah, and I talked to Joe today, and he said because of the construction, it's going to be difficult to try to get this thing arranged. So, and he didn't have a problem with suspending it for this year, so I support it also. So I move we suspend Discover Victoria Day for 2018. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimously. Next item, 7A, legal fees. Doug?
Mr. Mayor, in the meeting on February 26th, this council tabled a motion suggested by Mayor Funk to set a policy not to pay any legal fees for the expenses of the people involved in the open meeting law violation. And the council at that time tabled that motion in order to wait for the Attorney General's opinion to determine whether or not the mayor would have a conflict of interest in voting on this measure. We have now received the Attorney General's opinion, and the opinion of the city attorney is that the Attorney General's opinion that we received substantiates that, in fact, the Mayor Funk would have a conflict of interest in voting on this measure. But the agreement was that we would bring this back to the council after we received the Attorney General's opinion. So we have it back here tonight. The motion the mayor is suggesting is that move that the city of Victoria, in accordance with the open meeting law, set a policy to not pay any of the legal fees or expenses for Thomas O'Connor, James Crawley, Thomas Striegel, or Lanny Basel, who were found to have intentionally violated the open meeting law in the case currently pending before the Minnesota Supreme Court.
First off, as the parliamentarian, I need to understand, Councilmember Crowley, do you intend to participate in this discussion?
I would ask the advice of the attorney.
Well, Mayor and Council, Councilmember Crowley and Striegel, I think, have said before that they're conflicted on the issue of payment of reimbursement of legal fees. So, to the extent the motion is focused on that, their position has been that they're conflicted.
All right, at this time, I believe we need to follow the League of Minnesota Cities guidance. And gentlemen, if you are conflicted, if you would step away from the dais, please. Bob, that is the correct recommendation from the League, is that not?
You know, Mayor and Council, I guess to be honest, I haven't looked at that part of the League's advice. Certainly that's a practice that's common among elected officials that are conflicted, that they'll step away from the dais. The practice has been that the council members have been leaving the room. I haven't seen that practice before. I don't know if that's belt and suspenders or not. But yes, it is common that council members that are conflicted would step away. I'm not aware of a legal requirement that you do that.
I think that's the guidance from the League. Gentlemen, as we discuss this, are you going to stay here or are you going to step away? All right, thank you. All right, Bob, first off, I think this, just the way that this is written is misleading. First off, this is not an opinion from the AG. It's a letter from a staff attorney in the Attorney General's office. Opinions from the Attorney General are signed by the Attorney General, and that's not what this is. So to list this as an opinion from the AG, I think it's disingenuous and is misleading in and of itself. Furthermore, I think the case that the Attorney General or the staff attorney in the Attorney General's office that attached specifically supports the assertion that I do not have a conflict. You state I have a conflict. I'd like for the record for you to state your legal opinion as to what you believe my conflict is on this particular issue.
Well, so Mayor, as to the first point, I guess I am not aware of the legal distinction that you're trying to make about whether this is a Attorney General's opinion or not. I think it is. The Attorney General is statutorily authorized to give advice to city attorneys. That's what this is. The Attorney General can delegate her authority as she sees fit, so I'm not aware that she has to sign letters for them to be opinions from the Attorney General's office. So let me respond to that first. As to whether you're conflicted, I guess the issue that we brought to the Attorney General was this, very briefly, everyone sitting up here knows it, and I suspect the public does too, but let me say it. You, Mayor, had said you were conflicted. You changed your view on that last year, and at the meeting where you changed your view on that, the City Council voted that you're conflicted. That led to you getting an opinion saying that you're not conflicted and saying that the City Council had no role in deciding if you're conflicted. I was asked for an opinion about those same issues. I reached contrary conclusions. That's what led then to the council directing me to go to the Attorney General's office. So you're asking my legal conclusion. It's sort of in some respects irrelevant. The City Council has voted that you're conflicted. The Attorney General has clarified that that's appropriate for City Councils to make those decisions. So, I mean, I can read
I disagree with that statement because I think it's a judge that gets to make that decision, not the City Council. The conflict of interest is the next item. We'll address that then in this council's vote on determining whether or not I have a conflict of interest. The most appropriate case here is the Lenz case decided by the Minnesota Supreme Court. And in that case, I don't believe I have a conflict. Additionally, I believe I was misled when I initially stated I had a conflict. It was only later when I realized what was going on that I did my own checking and then hired my own attorney. And that attorney said, in his opinion, unequivocally, I do not have a conflict, and nor did I have a conflict. Once I learned that, that's when I changed my opinion, and that's when I paid my own money, got an opinion, and that attorney put that opinion in writing. Therefore, I disagree with your assertion. I also disagree that the Attorney General said this council gets to decide whether or not I have a conflict. I think the Supreme Court cases in Lentz and ETL, I think it was ETO case, that this staff attorney included also goes to the same point, and that is specifically, I have no direct personal financial interest in this. Therefore, I don't have a conflict. So I ask you again, I want you to put on the record specifically what you think I want your legal opinion as to what you think my conflict is here.
Well, Mayor, I'm not going to give that to you. I'm going to recite to you again what the AG has told us in this letter and what the AG has said in other opinions that I've read. And they've literally used the same words in this opinion. Whether a conflict of interest exists is a question of fact for the governing body to resolve in the first instance. That's the Attorney General responding to me about your conflict. So the Attorney General is saying that it's appropriate for this City Council to make that decision. Now, I understand that you may not agree with the Council's decision, but the Attorney General is saying it's appropriate for the City Council to make that decision.
All right, so
now, I can go on and explain to you why I disagree with your attorney about whether you have a conflict or not. The opinion that the Attorney General attaches in this response, which I think you referred to a minute ago, it's the Minnetonka opinion from 1978. That makes clear, in my judgment, that the scope of conflicts that can exist for local elected officials is broader than the statutes. And you're referring to the statutes, which themselves refer to only a pecuniary, in other words, a monetary interest in a matter that comes before the City Council. That's not the law in Minnesota. The law in Minnesota is that you can have a conflict as an elected official even if you don't have a direct financial interest in the matter coming before the council. That's very clear from this 1978 Attorney General opinion, which says, substantial, I'm quoting, substantial self-interest by a council member may, however, disqualify the member from participating in the council proceedings involving, in this case, it was a zoning matter. Participation by such an interested member may be cause for invalidation of the action. So it is not correct, in my judgment, to say whether or not you have a financial interest in reimbursing your opponent's legal fees is dispositive. That's not dispositive. The question is whether you have a significant, substantial is the word, substantial self-interest in that issue, and I think you've demonstrated that you do. I think you've demonstrated that by being the plaintiff in the case, by being the appellant in the case, and the Attorney General concludes being a petitioner to the Supreme Court. So, and I
am not a petitioner to the Supreme Court. My name was not on the petition submitted to the Supreme Court, nor do I have any direct financial interest. So I'm not going to debate this with you. I believe you're wrong and my attorney is right. Council member vote? Comments?
I have to listen to the city attorney, and I have to listen to the Attorney General's office. And we've gone to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General has responded that this determination can be made by the City Council, as Attorney Vos has just stated. And the Attorney General, by virtue of the case referred to, has stated that it just requires a substantial self-interest to have a conflict, and pecuniary interest isn't necessary. So you keep repeating that you have no financial interest. That the Attorney General is saying any substantial self-interest causes a conflict. I've heard, so we are repeating things we've discussed 5, 6, 7, 8 times in council meetings. This is the same dialogue we've had over and over and over again. In addition to the, this is all geared at the fact that we have some legal fees that are on the horizon, and there's a positioning going on as to whether we pay those fees or not. But this is really wasting a lot of the City Council's time. And, I spent my career, 30, 40 years, doing technical stuff, reading laws, accounting, financial stuff, and this This is not brain surgery. The Attorney General did reply and affirmed Attorney Vose's contention. And Mr. Mayor, your first reaction was the Attorney General didn't sign this. It was just one of her minions. Well, what kind of BS is that? The Attorney General delegated this task to a very able attorney and reviewed what was done. So to attack the document just because the Attorney General didn't sign it, let's get a little more deep here.
Councilmember Gregory.
With respect to the Attorney General opinion, I was going to address that on the next item. So I think what the Attorney General directed us to do was she did indicate that it was up to the public body to decide who has a conflict. And if it's up to the public body and they did direct us to look at a case, they don't say yes or no. They say, look at this case and see how it applies. And when I looked at that case, and the case was ETO Incorporated versus the Township of Marion, that case, I thought aligned much more so with the potential conflict of Councilmember Striegel and Crowley. So, and I was going to talk more about that on the next one. It's unfortunate that we're at this point. I think it's tragic. I don't think we needed to be here. I've been pretty much open to the idea of compromising on this issue pretty much from the get-go. We go all the way back to April 24th, 5 o'clock in that back room there. I met with Mr. Vos and Ms. Hokanen before that meeting. I came into that meeting with the intention of, I thought, okay, if we do some cost sharing, if we could get all or most of the money back that was paid in 2016, I could go ahead, I could support a not to exceed $30,000. That's kind of what I went into that meeting with. We didn't get there. We only had a half hour before the meeting started, so we never got there. So we came back to that meeting, and we ended up choosing to go to the Attorney General, and unfortunately, the Attorney General didn't give us a whole lot of that. So all the way back, so we really didn't decide anything. The Attorney General, I felt, didn't help us move this issue forward, and again, that was unfortunate. And then go to October, late October, early November. Ms. Hokanen gave me a phone call. First thing out of her mouth was, Tom, what are we going to do about legal fees? I said, Lori, I still feel that we got to do some cost sharing on this thing. There's got to be some compromise. And if we can't do the compromise, let's consider a declaratory judgment. We talked about both of those issues quite at length on both of those issues. There was a third issue we talked about, and I'll wait on that one for another day. But I think I've been open to the idea of compromise, and staff, and I've got this 3/8 email that I sent to Doug, and again, I'll read my start to it. It's like, please help me understand why you are taking the position on legal fees that the defendants should not share in any legal fees costs whatsoever. And I keep coming back to this idea of sharing seems to make sense. Compromise makes sense. Councilmember Vogt and I do not constitute a quorum. It's just, we're two guys, we're the last men standing, metaphorically, of course. But we're not a quorum. We're not making official business here when we discuss legal fees. We're just expressing our opinions, and our opinions are, Mr. Vogt thinks we should pay 100%, and I think we should pay something less than 100%. That's been my position. And staff has taken that because we're tied. We didn't change the direction that was set in June of 2016. We're not voting to change that. And staff has taken the position that if we're not changing, we're steamrolling straight ahead and paying 100%. I don't think that's right. So it's unfortunate that we're at this point.
So I have two final comments. First off, Mr. Vos, when you sent your request letter to the AG's office, you stated on there that the council voted 3 to 1 to 1 that I have a conflict, but yet you never told the AG's office that two of the people that voted are the people that have the direct financial interest in giving me a conflict to begin with, which is an absolute material fact that you admitted. You included that it was a 3-1-1 vote, but you never said that the two defendants in the case who voted I had a conflict had a valid reason to vote that, because if they can prevent me from voting on the issue, they get their legal fees paid. Secondly, when I was elected as the mayor, the residents knew at that time that I was a plaintiff. I withdrew from the appellate process before the appellate court even announced that its decision was coming out. And based on my own attorney's advice, I do not have a conflict. Therefore, I'm going to call the question. Can we bring the motion up, please?
I don't think there was one.
There was a motion that you read off.
I read a motion in the
So-
agenda, item, but somebody needs to make it.
So I move that in accordance with the open meeting law, this council sets a policy to not pay the personal legal fees of Thomas O'Connor, James Crowley, Thomas Striegel, and Lonnie Bassa, and that includes any expenses in the open meeting law case that is currently pending before the Minnesota Supreme Court. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
We've now set a policy to not pay those fees specific to that case. Secondly, I move that we direct.
Mr. Mayor, the attorney's opinion is that we're not going to count your vote in that.
Right. And according to the Supreme Court, I don't have a financial interest. We're going to move forward. I therefore move that we direct Doug Reeder, the interim city manager, and Kelly Grinnell, the finance director, that they are hereby prohibited in accordance with the policy this council has just set from signing any checks that pay the personal legal fees or expenses of Thomas O'Connor, James Crowley, Thomas Striegel, or Lonnie Bassa in the case that's currently pending before the Minnesota Supreme Court. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
Mr. Mayor, once again, in accordance with the city attorney's opinion, we will not count your vote.
You were just given instructions by the council not to pay. So if you choose to go forward, that's a different issue.
Mr. Mayor, I have received no instruction. It's a 1-1 vote, and that gives me no direction.
All right, well, this is going to end up in front of a judge. Next item, 7B, conflict of interest. I do not have a conflict. Cindy? Mark that down as a 2-1 vote in both of those motions. Note the objection of the city manager at the direction of the city attorney.
Well, Mayor, it's not your call what she writes down.
All right, I'm just having her record those votes and the objection. Thank you. Thank you. I want them to be in the meeting summary. Would you please ask the other council members to come back and join us? We're now on to 7B, conflict of interest. Doug?
I could take it.
Go ahead. Wait for the other council
All right,
members.
very good.
Mr. Mayor, this item was presented by Councilmember Gregory. He's requested the council to pass a motion which says that it is in the opinion of the city of this council that Councilmember Crowley and Councilmember Striegel do have a conflict of interest with respect to the mayor's conflict of interest, and their vote taken on this issue on July 24th, 2017 shall be null and void. So that is the motion that Councilmember Gregory has given you as for you to consider.
Thank you. I'll take it from here.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councilmember Gregory.
All right, thank you. Okay, first of all, if you could put the staff report up on the screen, could we get this attachment up there? Who's ever running the screen? Okay, here's the staff report for this item, and I was surprised to see legal review. The legal review is an email that I sent on 3/15. I'm not disappointed that it's the what's being offered as a legal review. I'm just surprised. I was expecting more than that. So, with that said, That's all we have. We have Mr. Voss's opinion based on a 315 email that now is public. I thought it was going to be a private email, and it got shared with council, and now it's the legal review for this particular item. So I'm surprised about that. So, and if we could bring the 315 email up. Okay, in the 315 email, I outlined my thoughts on this issue, but just before we get onto the motion itself, still dealing with some administrative things here regarding this legal review. If we could go to, page 2, where it says, okay, your question. Okay, your question, second paragraph there.
At the top of the page where it says your question is premised, is that what you're referring to?
Your question is premised. Okay. It says your question is premised on the incorrect view that a direct pecuniary interest is required to find a conflict. I don't think that was the premise, with all due respect. Mr. Voss, my premise to the question was I simply don't quite get it that Councilmember Striegel and Councilmember Crowley don't have that you don't see a pecuniary interest in their vote, in the outcome of their vote. So that was the premise, and I think if you page up a little bit with the last sentence of my statement there, the last sentence from just before that, I think here's a pretty good premise to my question. So I simply do not understand how the defendants in the lawsuit could not have a pecuniary interest in attempting to take away the mayor's vote. That was the premise. So, again, all due respect, I think you're mistaken on the premise there. So, and then if we could continue, go down a little bit. We're at, okay, right in the middle of the page there, it says, here, if Councilmember Striegel and Councilmember Crowley are conflicted on whether the mayor has a conflict, I think just using the word if kind of indicates you're really not quite sure. That's just my take on it. And then a couple lines down, you say, if Councilmember Striegel's and Crowley are conflicted, then the mayor is conflicted as well, in which case the council voted 101 that the mayor is conflicted. Either way, the mayor is found to have a conflict. Okay, so the original vote was 3-1-1. Okay, two members, Councilmember Striegel and Councilmember Crowley, were part of that vote. If we rewind the clock, the mayor, we haven't had the vote yet. The mayor's vote counts. Mayor's vote counts. We can't just automatically erase the vote just because you believe that he has a conflict. So the mayor's vote still counts.
Issue, Councilor. It's the question before the. Sorry to interrupt you, Mayor. May I speak?
Go ahead.
The question that you're talking about is whether the mayor is conflicted, not whether to pay reimbursement of legal fees.
Whether the mayor is conflicted. Whether the mayor is conflicted. His vote still counts. We didn't vote yet that he doesn't. It's up to the public body to decide. That's what the Attorney General said. Before that vote happened, the public body did not decide, right? Public body didn't decide. We didn't decide whether the mayor has a conflict or not. So the vote itself, if Councilmember Striegel can't vote, if they illegally voted, that's what I'm saying. If they illegally participated in a vote, then their vote should be null and void, not the mayor's. The mayor is not conflicted. So we can disagree in semantics on that. But I believe that vote was a 1-to-1-to-1 vote, and therefore that motion failed. There was no vote that the mayor had a conflict. Okay, so the Attorney General, on to our motion itself. The Attorney General directed us to look at a former case, okay? the attorney, we asked the Attorney General whether the mayor has a conflict, and they said, well, in order to determine whether or not the mayor has conflict, look at this case. They don't give us a yes or no answer, and that's one thing I've learned about the Attorney General. They rarely give us yes or no answers, so they give us case law. Okay, look at this case law, see how it applies to you. And when I looked at it, like I said earlier, it seemed to apply much more closely or align with Councilmember Crowley and Striegel's potential conflict. So the case itself was ETO Incorporated versus the Township of Marion. ETO Incorporated is the legal name of a little bar called Fergie's, okay? And the Township of Marion, just a real little township southeast of Rochester, a little township of Marion. So, again, it's just a little township. They don't have a council. They have a board, a 3-member board. And back in 1982, this little bar called Fergie's opened up. Okay, people in the city or this township weren't happy with Fergie's bar when it opened up, so they were upset that this 3-member board approved this little bar called Fergie's. Okay, so again, people in the town weren't very happy with it, and especially this gentleman by the name of Wendell Kuhn. He was particularly upset, and he's going around town telling everybody that, doggone it, this bar is costing me money. I've got land next to this bar, and my land has decreased in value by $100,000. And ever since this bar opened up, so he's telling everybody that's going to listen to him that his land went down $100,000 in value. Well, so the bar opens up, 82, and lo and behold, because of the friction on the board with the townspeople, one member steps down and there's a seat opened up, and sure enough, Wendell Kuhn got himself elected to this board. So now Wendell's on the board. A year and a half after the bar opened in 1982, a year and a half later, their liquor license came up for renewal. And now Wendell's on the board, and he, along with a friend of his on the board, voted to deny the liquor license. The reason they gave was that it was kind of close to a school, and it was too close to a school, and also it was incompatible with the neighborhood. So that's the reason they gave for this, to deny this liquor license. Well, anyways, okay, so Fergie's wasn't very happy with that, right? They invested $85,000 in remodeling this bar to get it opened up. So they weren't very happy. So they sued. They sued the Township of Marion. They won. They actually won in district court. Well, of course, the board wasn't very happy with that, so they appealed. They appealed to the appellate court, and the township board won, kind of on a technicality about the school issue. So they won, and they took the license away again. Well, Fergie's Bar appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court kind of ruled that the school, which actually opened up after Fergie's opened up, so they ruled that Fergie's was there first, and so therefore they were grandfathered in. So the rules around the school, distance from the school, that wasn't an issue. So the only issue left to decide at the Supreme Court was whether or not Mr. Kuhn had himself a financial interest in his vote. And of course, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Fergie's Bar. And the Supreme Court, the language that they used was kind of harsh against Mr. Kuhn. It said he had a direct, substantial, flagrant conflict of interest because he owned this land. He had 53 acres next to the bar. So they said he has a direct, substantial, flagrant conflict of interest. Now, I think it's interesting to note that this Supreme Court decision was 1985, and Wendell Kuhn still lives next to Fergie's Bar down down in this little town. So he's still there. Fergie's Bar is still there. But here we have this interesting Supreme Court decision. So how does that apply to Councilmember Striegel and Crowley? So on July 24th, we had a vote whether or not they were conflicted on this particular issue. They voted that the mayor had a conflict. So what's the likely outcome of that vote? Okay, they were voting essentially to take away the mayor's right to vote. That's what you just decided happened there. They took away his right to vote on legal fee issues. So they voted essentially to take away the mayor's right to vote. And did they have a personal financial interest in it? Okay, I say they did. If you think about it, kind of like as dominoes, okay. So first of all, the likely outcome, if they vote that the mayor has a conflict, okay, they take away his right to vote, and what's the likely outcome? Likely outcome will be that Mr. Reeder continues to pay legal fees. He's already told me he won't do that unless the council gives him direction not to. And since we're the only last two people standing, we're not going to give you direction not to. So that's the likely outcome of voting that he does have a conflict. If they suggest that he doesn't have a conflict, again, the likely outcome is that they won't get their personal legal fees paid. These are their personal expenses. These invoices are made out to them. So they are their personal expenses. So if you think about it, if you compare the two cases, and you think about it kind of like dominoes, old Wendell Coons, he voted to take away the liquor license. That's the first domino. Second domino, the bar kind of has to close before, and then the third domino is supposedly the value of his land will go back up after those dominoes fall. Here, Councilmember Crowley and Striegel vote to take away the mayor's right to vote. That's the first domino. Second domino to fall is that they get their legal fees paid. So I just don't see how any reasonable person can come to the conclusion that Wendell Coons' conflict, it was adjudicated. He did have a conflict. How can his conflict be more apparent than Councilmember Crowley and Striegel? As far as I'm concerned, they're probably even more conflicted than Wendell Coons was. So I just simply don't get it. I think that they do have a conflict, and it's up to us, according to the Attorney General, we get to decide whether any member here has a conflict. That was news to me. You had instructed me that it's up to the individuals themselves to decide, and that's why I abstained on that vote. That's why it was a 3-1-1. I abstained because I didn't feel that I could sit in judgment of anybody up here. Those issues, based on my understanding, have always been adjudicated, just like Wendell Coons got adjudicated, all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's who decided that Wendell Coons has a conflict. I personally, unless you have a case that can show differently, I don't think this has ever happened before in the state of Minnesota, that a council took away another member's right to vote. Never happened before.
I would like to add, I'd like to add that the Minnesota Supreme Court is the one that adjudicated this and took those votes away. And I don't have a personal interest. Yes, I have a personal interest in the outcome of the case, but I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for the taxpayers of Victoria that elected me to put me here, right? They knew before I ran, right, that I was a plaintiff. I went ahead and ran. I'm going to vote for them because I don't have any direct financial interest. And the interest I'm representing is the taxpayers of Victoria who put me here to vote and represent them. This council, there's no case, there's no statutory basis that gives them the right to take my ability to vote away when the people of Victoria gave it to me and want me to protect their tax dollars. So that, combined with this Minnesota Supreme Court case that says that in that case, they removed the votes of those elected officials who had a direct financial interest in that vote, and that's no different, in my opinion, than what's going on here with all of the different votes, the procedural maneuvering and everything else, where Councilmember Crowley and Councilmember Striegel have prevented this council until tonight actually setting a policy in accordance with the meeting, open meeting law. They never should have participated in those votes. And every time I asked you, Bob, and then I'll give you a chance to respond, every time I asked you about that, you would say, well, it's been the practice of this council to allow that. Well, this council has been doing it wrong. According to what I've been finding, that is in fact wrong. So I would like you tonight to state your legal opinion as to whether or not Councilmember Crowley and Councilmember Striegel can participate on votes or procedural motions tied to the payment of their personal legal fees.
So, Mayor and Council, boy, as usual, a lot of stuff there, and if I was taking notes, maybe I could try and hit all of those points that I hadn't heard about before tonight. As to the ETO case, which, Councilmember, you spent a fair amount of time explaining, let's just be clear about that. The AG referred us all, me and you, to the ETO case, not for the proposition that you just spent a fair amount of time talking about, not for the proposition that that case talks about whether a conflict exists or not. The AG asked us all to take a look at that case in response to my question. You next ask whether Mayor Funk should be prohibited from voting on the reimbursement issue if it is determined that he has a conflict of interest. You also ask how Mayor Funk's vote should be tallied if he does what he's done tonight, if he's found to have a conflict but votes anyway. Again, this office doesn't generally give opinions on fact-dependent or hypothetical questions, but take a look at, I'm paraphrasing now, take a look at the ETO case. The ETO case answers the question what you do when a council member found conflicted votes or attempts to vote anyway. So that's what the case was referred to us about, is what do you do, let me finish, what do you do when a council member has a conflict and votes? And the answer is, in the ETO decision, you didn't mention this, but the answer is that where the council member in that case admitted that he had an interest in the outcome of the bar's application, he should not have been permitted to vote. So the legal principle in that case that we're asked to look at is that council members with conflicts shouldn't vote. That's what that case stands for. As to your point, Mayor, no, it's not my view. First of all, I know whoever said it, Mayor or Councilmember Gregory, I think it's right. I am not aware of I'm aware of several situations where, take another step back. In the first instance, the very first instance, it is good practice. It's good practice followed by every city that my firm represents, and I suspect the vast majority of cities across the state of Minnesota are advised that council members should decide for themselves first if they have a conflict. They should consult with the attorney if they think they might have a conflict. They should consult with their own attorney if they'd like to. They should think about whether they have a conflict. You and I have had that conversation about your own concerns that you've had, and you've done the right thing. You've disclosed them, you've thought about them, and you've let the folks know that you don't believe you're conflicted. That's the way almost all city council members behave across the state, and I think that's the way they're encouraged to behave. It is rare that an issue of a conflict ever has to go to the full council to be voted on. It has happened. Certainly there are city councils in the state that have voted on that question before, but you're asking the question, has it ever happened that a city council has been asked to vote on one of its members' conflicts where other members are alleged to have a conflict on the question of that member's conflict? That's novel. I don't know if that's ever come up before. I'm not aware of it ever having come up before, and I told you in my response, which I thought was prompt and complete. You didn't apparently see that way, but I gave you a response 3 hours after you asked me the questions. I thought it was a complete response, and the answer was, I'm not aware of any authority. I'm not aware of any AG opinion, any statute, any case, anything out there that would answer the question, could you be conflicted as a council member in voting on another council member's conflict because of what you think the result of that conflict might mean for some other issue upon which you're conflicted? I mean, again, as I said in the email, it's hard to even say that question out loud, right? So I'm aware, I gave you the honest answer, I'm aware of no authority, none whatsoever, that answers that question. Now, Mayor, to your point, what is my view on that? My view is that no, there is not a conflict. And I'll tell you why. It's because no one in this room has a bigger conflict on whether you have a conflict than you. You clearly are the most interested in the question of whether you have a conflict or not. You're the person that we're asking the question about. So if we're going to take it that far removed from the underlying issue, reimbursement of legal fees, to who has a conflict on the question of whether the mayor is conflicted, you clearly are conflicted if we're going to take it that far. My view is we would not take it that far. My view is that you all have an obligation up here that you meet, I think you try to meet all the time, which is to do the right thing. You've been elected by the good folks of this city to do the right thing for your city. And so I think they expect you, Mayor, to your point about what they knew before they voted for you, they expect you to do the right thing. They expect you to, in good conscience, vote on your very own conflict based on your understanding of the Lenz case. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you're so wrong that you couldn't possibly take the view you do in good faith. I think you do take the view in good faith. But you're expected to vote on your very own conflict in good faith, based on your understanding of the law, based on your understanding from your lawyer, whatever. And that applies to Councilmembers Striegel and Crowley, too. They're expected to vote on your conflict or anyone's conflict if this ever comes up again. You're going to be expected to vote on each other's conflicts if it ever comes to the council based on your understanding of that member's situation and the matter coming before the body. So, I don't think that Councilmembers Striegel and Crowley are conflicted on the question of your conflict.
Is that your legal opinion?
You're conflicted on that point.
Is that your legal opinion?
Yes, that's my legal opinion.
Okay, well, I disagree. I think it's clear from the Minnesota Supreme Court case that came with this latest, the one that came with the latest AG opinion, ETL? ETO. The Supreme Court ruled in that case that the elected official in that case did have a direct financial interest, and that vote was thrown out by the Minnesota Supreme Court. So how can you sit here and tell me that their vote to get me conflicted so that they can get paid doesn't qualify in the same category? I'm not going to debate it with you. My attorney says I don't. The other thing is I think is misleading is the Lenz case, specifically one of the provisions in there, and this is generally speaking. Let's assume for a moment, I don't agree with it, but let's just assume for the moment that the three of us, myself and the two council members to my left, are conflicted. The Lenz case and that's another Minnesota Supreme Court case, came out and basically said that in order to establish a quorum, the person with the least amount of conflict can vote on an issue in order to establish a quorum. And in this particular case, when applying to passing a policy under the open meeting law, I clearly have less of a conflict in that regard and under those circumstances than the two council members to my left. So this maneuvering about trying to vote that I have a conflict and taking all of the taxpayers of Victoria who voted and put me into office, taking and disenfranchising them through a procedural process is quite frankly makes no sense, especially in my opinion in view of the Supreme Court cases where the person with the direct financial interest, their vote was thrown out, right? You haven't been able to cite any statute that allows them to do that, and nor have you cited, in my opinion, a Supreme Court case that says that I have a absolute conflict of interest. I don't. So I'm not going to continue to debate it with you. At this point, I call the question. We don't have a motion here, do we? All right. Well, go ahead.
It is a motion. It is the opinion of this council that Councilmember Crowley and Councilmember Striegel do have a conflict of interest with respect to the mayor's conflict of interest, and their vote taken on this issue on July 24th, 2017 should be made null and void.
I'll second that motion. Discussion?
Attorney Vose, where do I stand on this? So previously you said I was not conflicted. Where am I?
Well, so Mayor and Council, I guess this is a vote. It's an after the. I mean, again, this is probably novel too, but I guess it's a almost year later vote on whether a prior vote was taken by conflicted members, and so I guess we're voting on whether you two have a conflict. I've just said my opinion is that you don't, and the mayor has, of course, behaved himself as though that doesn't raise a conflict. He has voted on his conflict. So I don't know if anyone up here disagrees with me about that, but the mayor doesn't disagree, and you two don't disagree, I take it. I don't know if the two of you disagree with that, but apparently the practice has been, and I agree with it, that you can vote on whether you have a conflict or not. This issue is whether you have a conflict, so no, you don't have a conflict on whether you have a conflict.
Thank you.
Attorney Vose, since this is part of of the
It's discussion, go ahead.
I'm sitting here with your letter summarizing the Attorney General's findings, and I'm sitting here with the signed Attorney General's statement. And the conclusion is that the mayor's vote, if he casts such a vote, should not be counted. And he has clearly stated that he's going to vote and he will want it counted. What, as a person that was duly elected, like the mayor, he's not the only one that was elected. What are we to expect here? This session is in disarray. They're defying what you have, the advice you've given us. They're basically giving their own interpretation of the Attorney General's opinion, which is signed by a peon, according to what the mayor says.
I never said that.
Well, you also said there's no policies or procedures in this city. So basically, what am I to do as a person that was elected and I sit here and listen to this? How are we walking out of this chamber tonight? That's my question for you, and if the city manager has anything to say, I'd appreciate it. Some wisdom.
Well, and that's a fair question. I heard your interim manager say that he intends to follow my advice. So I think it's a non-issue. The mayor has indicated maybe there's more legal proceedings to come, and that may be true. But my view is based on the ETO case, Mayor. There, I'm citing the case. It's a Supreme Court case. Based on that case and on other authorities, when a member found to be conflicted by the body votes anyway, that vote should not be counted. That's my view, and I understand that Doug is going to take that view. So I don't know what else there is for you to do. I guess that is where apparently the city staff is going to stand.
Just one question. You don't see a financial benefit to them trying to silence the mayor?
So, Mayor and Council, it's come up a couple of times. I haven't gotten around to that. Here's the problem with that. You know I don't, but let's dig deeper into it anyway. The premise of that point is that Councilmember Striegel and Crowley would vote that the mayor is conflicted so that he can't vote on the underlying issue knowing that his vote will win the day. At the time that vote was taken, at the time the vote in July of 2017 was taken, the mayor had not, to my knowledge, publicly expressed the view that he would not pay any reimbursement of legal fees. In fact, until that very meeting, he had always recused himself. So he'd never publicly expressed a view on reimbursement. And as you just said tonight, your view was that the city should pay something. So at the time that vote was taken, the view was that council member vote would pay, you would pay something, and the mayor had not expressed it.
I think you're misrepresenting what he said. He said he was looking for a compromise. He didn't say the city should pay something.
Okay, so my words, fair enough. So those I think were the known facts as of July of 2017. So how I would be expected to conclude that council members Striegel and Crowley were taking a vote on the mayor's conflict, knowing that the consequence of that would be that he would vote to pay no reimbursement at all, and that you would be in agreement with that, and that would win the vote. That is a lot of speculation, and I'm not prepared to do that speculating. That's the point of your question, though, is that they should have been able to speculate that that's what was going on. And I'm not going to, again, I'm sorry, but the premise that I operate on here with you and with the other 4 cities that I represent is that you spend a great deal of time for very little compensation working for your city, and you're doing it in good faith. So that's my basic presumption. I presume that of all of you. You don't agree about lots of things, but I presume that you're all doing it in good faith. So I start with that presumption for the council members voting on another council member's conflict.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Councilmember Gregory, would you repeat it so we can vote?
Oh, that's asking a lot. I lost it.
He's good.
Yeah, go ahead and repeat it, Cindy, please. Thank you. There is a valid second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay.
Nay.
So that motion does not pass. It fails on a 2-3 vote. The nays were Councilmember Strigel, Councilmember Crowley, and Councilmember Vogt. Next item. C, request for declaratory judgment on legal fees. Before we proceed, Mr. Vogt, I want your legal opinion since this directly affects the personal payments of Councilmember Crowley and Strigel, whether they can participate in this discussion.
Yeah, Mayor, I absolutely can't give you that opinion. As you know, I asked questions about what we're talking about here, and Councilmember Gregory, who's the proponent, said that he didn't know the answers to those questions. So I don't know exactly what issues are being proposed to be asked about. I don't know who the proposed parties are. And so, no, I can't issue an opinion. But
So
I can say
that,
in
Mr. Vogt,
the
that wasn't the
absence of
question.
that-
The
in
question.
absence of that information, I presume no one is conflicted. I presume that this is the way it's been phrased in the email exchanges that you have in front of you is that this would be direction to Doug, to the interim city manager, to work with somebody, I don't know who, to figure all that out. So I don't know how anyone can be conflicted on that. That's not a definitive.
So let me be precise then. I want your legal opinion whether or not Councilmember Crowley and Councilmember Strigel can participate on the discussion of asking a court for a declaratory judgment specifically on the payment of their personal legal fees that was done through the process of your memo that says, since we bought an insurance policy, therefore, that's the equivalent of the city council passing a policy. And then secondly, whether the city manager, Hokanen, exceeded her statutory authority when she paid more than $20,000 and in fact exceeded the city of Victoria policy limit that further reduced that amount to $10,000. So I want your legal opinion whether the two council members to my left can participate in that discussion, in that request for a declaratory judgment about the payment of their personal legal fees.
Yeah, Mayor, and I would just adopt by reference all of our prior discussion about conflicts. I don't see this as being any different than our prior discussions about those issues.
So they can participate and decide not to get a declaratory judgment to see if the payments to them are even legal. Is that what you're saying?
I'm actually not rendering an opinion. If you really want an opinion on this, I didn't get answers to my questions. I guess I'd have to.
So what questions do you need answered?
The three questions that I asked.
What were they?
Yeah, and I don't have them in front of me, but again, I've been trying to, work together, and again, I mentioned this to Lori back in October, email to Mr. Reeder about 6 weeks ago. Let's sit down, talk about the mechanics. I don't know exactly how the whole process works. So kind of like when we made the process, the idea that we're going to pay the legal fees of anybody for anything going forward. We didn't have any information on that. We don't have any policies or anything. We're just going to pay legal fees for anybody, regardless of whatever they're charged with. So we didn't have any information on that. But now all of a sudden we need details before we can get an opinion.
Mayor and Council, I had nothing to do with setting that policy. I don't vote on policies.
Oh, anyways. I think that the questions that I had posed, those questions have been around for a long time. Everybody's asking, does the city manager have the authority to pay? And does the city manager have the authority to exceed the $20,000 in multiple payments? Those questions have been asked before. We asked the Attorney General those opinions or questions. So the questions aren't new. And those are the ones that I was hoping to get answered in a declaratory judgment.
So you won't.
Those are the questions. As far as selecting an attorney, I don't know. I presume that it would be up to the non-conflicted members to decide that. Who's going to be the attorney?
Yeah, so Mayor and Council, I don't know the answer. I think it's the same question that I just told you before. There's no authority on it. If it's not that question, if it's the question, should the city reimburse legal fees, then I think you're conflicted too on that, Mayor. So, but I don't know that I'm not sure how we're cutting the line on this question, whether this is the question of whether the city should pay reimbursement or whether the city manager should have paid in the past. And I don't know is the answer. That's the honest answer.
I think
I have to look into it, but I don't know.
The purpose behind the declaratory judgment is to get the attorney opinions out of here and get a judge to decide the issue once and for all. Had we done that early in 17, we wouldn't be having all of these discussions. And I bet if we took the time to add up all of the money that we've paid Kennedy and Graven over the past 15 plus months on this, it probably would have cost far less to just get a declaratory judgment and determine whether or not that initial policy and the questions I asked about purchasing insurance is the equivalent of passing a policy under the open meeting law. And secondly, the question related to the statutory limits and policy limits of the authority of the city manager. Had we done that, this would have all been done, and we would have had an authoritative source, i.e. a judge, that nobody could argue with, and we'd be able to move forward. But instead, the council members to my left keep using procedural motions and then how you interpret things to avoid any sort of process where we can get a definitive answer to these questions when an authoritative source, and even if you go back to the Attorney General's letters, they talk about we don't determine facts. Well, courts do. And it was very simply and very easily, for a small amount of money, we could have had all of this resolved before, right? And we should have done that. The point of this is that's what we are trying to do, to put this issue to bed once and for all. I'm willing to table this so that you can provide a written opinion as to whether or not they have a conflict of interest. And they being the two council members to my left, whether they can participate in that discussion, because I want a written legal opinion from you so that we can go ahead and move forward before we go ahead and take a vote on this.
Tabling it sounds like a good idea.
I move that we table this until such time as we can get a legal opinion from the attorney, specifically related to Councilmember Crowley and Councilmember Striegel, if they have a conflict of interest on this specific declaratory judgment. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Can we discuss?
I'm sorry. Discussion. Go ahead.
Can I vote on this?
Motion to table is not discussable.
Excuse me?
Motion to table is not discussable.
All right. I think he's got a valid question, though. Do you have a legal question for the attorney?
Can I vote on this?
Okay.
That
My
question.
understanding is I can. Is that correct, Mr. Bose?
Yeah, Mayor and council, I don't see a problem with that, no.
Thank you.
Okay. So once again, we have a valid motion to table this until the city attorney can provide a written legal opinion as to Councilmember Striegel and Crowley's ability to participate in a discussion related to it.
The continuation of this, I think, is you're making a mockery of this body, and I'm going to vote to not table this. This is ridiculous.
So
I'll second it.
all in favor of tabling this as stated signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
No.
All right, that fails rather on a 2-3 vote. Councilmember Crowley, Councilmember Striegel, and Councilmember Vogt did not vote to table this. Therefore, there is no action taken on item C. Report to the city manager, rather. Doug?
Mayor, I did receive 2 communications today and Friday concerning the proposed yard waste site, which the county is working on. And one is a notice that the county board will decide on April 2nd what to do with that.
April 3rd, isn't
April
it?
3rd, is it? Okay. What
April
to do
3rd.
with that issue. And secondly, we received a request from another county staff member of just informing us that there are a number of private places to take yard waste that the county residents could use. This issue will come up on April 3rd at the board. So, just so you're aware.
For everybody out there that I know there's a lot of interest in Victoria, it's April 3rd at 4 p.m. The time wasn't set. It's now set, April 3rd, 4 p.m., at the Carver County Board of Commissioners, which is down in Chaska. So please help spread the word. Doug, can we get this out to the HOAs that are over in that area that sent a lot of people and had a lot of interest in this to make sure that that information gets out into residents' hands?
Certainly.
Okay. Doug, other things?
That's all I have.
City Attorney?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Crowley?
No report.
Councilmember Striegel?
No report.
Councilmember Vogt?
I have no report. I just have a question on this last topic. If the county votes not to get out of the yard waste business, what are the alternatives for the city? Because they're basically throwing it back at us. We protested vigorously, and so they're just saying, we're getting out of the business. They're throwing it back at us. Now, are we going to have hundreds of people going to this makeshift site that we've had in the old Public Works area? And is the city going to be able to handle that? What does this do to us?
Doug, before you answer, that wasn't on the agenda tonight. It's valid questions. Can you take those questions and get some answers and then send a response back out to the council, and then we can put it for discussion? Because I don't want to discuss that here without residents being notified. But get answers, and then we can bring that up at a further council meeting.
I can do that.
Okay. Councilmember Vogt, anything else?
No.
Councilmember Gregory?
No report.
I have no report. I move we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.